If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1. In an endless expanse of darkness and nothingness, suddenly a shape appeared out of nowhere. It was impossible to make out what it looked like, it was completely covered in shadows. However, this sudden appearance must have been unexpected to the shadow, as it was definitely looking around in confusion. It quickly spotted the only mark in this vast darkness, a small, shabby building resembling a bar. A short moment of hesitancy later, the shadow silently stepped through the entrance into the building. "Oh? A newcomer!" A voice called out from behind a counter. It was another shadowy figure standing there, looking at the man who entered the bar with two white, glowing eyes. Besides the man, the bar was completely empty. Behind him and his wooden counter was a strange collection of crystal vials filled with different kinds of glowing liquids in all sorts of colors, neatly positioned on shelves. They looked like they were constantly shifting and changing, a truly incomprehensible view. "Welcome, welcome to my place in this endless abyss, wanderer," the shadowy being greeted the man with a dark and booming voice. It seemed like the wanderer tried to say something, but not even a whisper left his throat. It didn't look like he could talk, so he instead chose to approach the bar counter. "Oh, you noticed it. It's a fourth-dimensional storage space born from my unique ability," the shadow said as he noticed the wanderer's gaze upon the shelves behind him. "By the way, you can just think about what you want to say. You can read my thoughts," the wanderer thought in wonder. "Kinda. It's also related to my ability here," the shadow replied. "In fact, I am quite similar to you. A soul that died, landing in this endless void outside of any known universe. I am dead. Outside of my universe? How? Yep, you are dead. How? No idea. I am not sure about the mechanics of death. Maybe there was a malfunction in our afterlives that threw us out of our universes and brought us here. It doesn't matter. We are here now and have to live with it. It took a very long time for me to accept this," replied the shadow patiently. "I see. So what happens now? Will I stay here forever? How did you even build this place?" "I didn't see anything in this void," asked the wanderer, taking a critical look at the bar. Complex questions. I wandered this empty place for a long time, a very long time, until one day I found something. A glowing orb of power, an essence. This essence gave me a unique power over myself. It is called the essence of the reincarnator's pub," the shadow explained. Essences are a powerful item, a house bound to you, or even a unique aspect of existence that fuses into the existence of a being, bestowing one or more unique powers. They can be as simple as bestowing a soul-bound weapon on you, as abstract as bestowing the powers of Christmas, or even as overpowering as granting the power of becoming a boundless godlike being. My essence granted me this bar. I see. And why are you still here if you have power like this? Wouldn't a bar be more useful in one of the universes, pointed out the wanderer. Obviously, yes. But to leave this void, you need a lot of power. Unfortunately, my essence didn't grant me the power to leave it myself. So here I am sitting with a bar in the void, the shadow laughed. It's called the reincarnator's pub, so shouldn't you be able to reincarnate first and then have this bar? Would be nice, but in fact, it's a bar that allows me to reincarnate people under certain rules. I can even grant essences to them, but I don't use them myself, was the dry reply the wanderer got. So what you are telling me is that you will reincarnate me? What's the catch? The wanderer asked in suspicion. I will obviously reincarnate you. What I get is quite simple. Entertainment. I am stuck here. Wanderers that I reincarnate and watch are pretty much my only source of entertainment in between eternities. Since I reincarnated you, I am able to watch your new life. But there are certain rules I have to follow based on the strength of your soul. For you, it would be a reincarnation into a random universe. Neither you nor I can choose it. Imagine some dude that spins a wheel where hundreds of fictional universes are on, that's how that gets chosen. But there are things that we can affect. Based on your soul's strength, I can grant you 2 boons. These boons can be a random essence each, or your memories of the world you land in since it is probably a fictional one that you are familiar with, or even a custom start. The choice is yours. Will I know which universe I am going to before making my choice? Nope, it will be a surprise for you. Part of your setting will be determined by myself, and other parts are random, based on a ton of different factors, the shadow replied honestly. Of course, I will try to make the parts I am able to affect as entertaining for me as possible and give you the chance to live a long and eventful life. More entertainment for me. Eventful, I see. So there is no way for me to customize my start a bit or something. Beyond the choice of keeping my universe of the world I am landing in, the Wanderer asked. Getting a good start was always something that could snowball into later on becoming even more powerful. If he got some powerful essences that granted him no powers at the beginning but ended up as a poor and starving child, he very well could end his new life instantly. Nope, but don't worry too much about it. While I can't choose your exact start, I can affect your reincarnation enough to ensure that your existence is relevant to the world you end up in. Most of the setting is random, which even grants you the chance to start in an extremely privileged life. Even if the chances are slim, since there are an infinite amount of possibilities and the majority of them are relatively normal starts. But one thing is sure, you will have the chance to make the most of your life and live at least a normal human life into old age if you don't act like an idiot. I see. While I can't affect my starting position, my canon knowledge could always be useful if I pick it. I could get all the opportunities there are. But the real trump cards would always be my essences, since they are not necessarily native to the universe. Tough choice. If I choose an essence, is there a chance for one or both of them to turn out to be worthless? No, an essence will always be useful in some capacity. There is no essence that is worthless. A weak essence would be something like a soulbound common weapon or armor that you could always summon to you. Not strong, but still useful. There are a few thousand of them in different variations in the pool amongst billions of possibilities. There is nothing that would be totally useless, like a power that allows you to grow your hair by an additional centimeter a day or something similar. And if your first essence is already something like a soulbound weapon, all essences of the same type will fall out of the pool of possible draws. So it's a gamble that can result in anything from godhood to always having a weapon ready, but picking two essences will maximize my chances for something good. Why should I be worried? A life where I already know the plot of my world is boring. I'd rather have a fun and exciting adventure where I go all out and rise to the peak instead of playing it safe. I'll go with the gamble and pick the two essences, was the decision of the Wanderer after a short moment of thought. Essences it is. Let's see what you get. Turning around, the shadow put his hand into the shelves and shuffled through them for a while before pulling two round crystalline vials out. One was filled with a glowing blue liquid, and the other was pure gold with rainbow sparks. Oh, not bad. Not on the level of being a boundless god or even overpowered. The chance of being one of them was slim, but both are decent and have growth potential to reach the level of godhood. The blue glowing one is the essence of the gamer, and the golden one with the sparks is the essence of the dimensional trader. Observing the vials, the Wanderer asked, what do they do? The essence of the gamer is a very useful one. It's extremely powerful in the long run. It turns you into a gamer, inspired by Han Jihun from the manhwa the Gamer, though it isn't identical. This essence grants you a system with the basic functionalities of every gamer, a status with allocatable stat points and information, an inventory, a skill system, settings, and more, since it even adapts to your unique needs based on your life situation, explained the shadow while holding up the blue essence. He then raised the golden one. Meanwhile, this dimensional trader essence allows you to appraise anything, gaining information about it, including a value that you can understand. It allows you to trade anything, even conceptual things, but this needs to be done through a contract. Things like a sword, for example, can normally be exchanged for money without needing a contract. And lastly, the most important part of this essence is that you can declare a property you own, your dimensional store, connecting it to different universes. You will learn the details once you have your store. But one important thing to remember is that it will be a long time before you can move the store. Maybe even never. It depends on you. So choose a property or location that you can defend. The store can be destroyed from the outside, and you won't be able to get it back. And the cool thing is that all of this will be adapted into your gamer essence, granting you a system to control your dimensional trader with all its options and functionalities. This is the adaptation part of the gamer system that I mentioned. Okay, I will keep that in mind. Will I lose my memories of the other worlds too, now that I have the essence of the dimensional trader? The Wanderer asked, interested. No, there is no need for that. Why? Because of multiple factors. First of all, you don't control where and when your store connects to other worlds. Secondly, these worlds are not necessarily the same as the ones you know. There could be an alternate timeline. And lastly, the butterfly effect is also a thing, introducing a connection into the multiverse will cause enough ripples that you will soon lose the ability to predict the future plot, the shadow replied with a small smirk. I see. So what do I need to do? Your new life starts as soon as you drink the 2 liquids. I expect you to give me a good show. So have an eventful life. The shadow said with a wide smirk as he handed the 2 crystal vials with the glowing blue and golden-colored liquids. Now drink up and have fun on your new adventure. With a short stare at the shadow, the wanderer gulped the liquids down one after the other with a large gulp. For a very long moment, it felt like he could see through the shadows covering the man, a tall, swarthy man resembling a pharaoh, before suddenly the world around him turned black. Chapter 2. Where am I? He thought as he opened his eyes in confusion and pain. His forehead was burning, causing him massive pain, like a migraine coming from inside his head, spreading to the outer layers of his skin. While he adjusted to the pain, his eyes began to adjust to his surroundings. Even though it was hard to make anything out, wherever he was, it was dark. All around him was darkness, and it was cold and wet. He could hear the dripping of water on the stone somewhere in the background. Wherever it was, it didn't feel like a house or anything. His eyes adjusted to the brightness as well as they could, and he realized he was in a dark cave. Before he could think of anything, he heard a small pop sound, and something appeared in front of his field of vision. Welcome, gamer. The moment this notification appeared, the pain he had been feeling on his forehead vanished. And he finally realized what had been going on as the memories of the events in the abyss returned to him. Your essences have completely fused with your being. The system is now ready for use. Have fun. The gamer has acquired 5 new skills. Gamer's Mind, Passive, LV. Max, allows the user to calmly and logically think things through. Allows a peaceful state of mind. Immunity to mental status effects. Gamer's Body, Passive, LV. Max, grants a body that allows the user to live in the real world like a game. Interdimensional Trader, Active/Passive, LV1, a skill received through the essence of the Interdimensional Trader, allowing the user to turn a building in his possession into an interdimensional store, connecting it to the multiverse. Subskills, Create Store, Active creates a dimensional store in an owned building, 0/1. Appraise, Active the ability to appraise objects for their value and relevant trading information. Contract, Active, LV. Max, a skill received through the essence of the Interdimensional Trader, allowing the user to form contracts that allow the exchange of anything in the possession of the 2 parties, including conceptual things. Neither party can be forced into a contract through mind control or similar abilities. Blackmail is still a valid method. Merchant's Tongue, Passive, LV. Max, allows the user to instantly learn any language he requires to communicate with potential customers. Okay. That was quite a lot at once. It seems like his second essence had really manifested in the form of skills, giving him 3 additional ones. The existence of Gamer's Mind and Gamer's Body was a relief. As soon as his system had started, his pain had vanished. And not mentioning the stress he would normally feel in such a situation, his skills were working splendidly. Now that the pain was no longer at the forefront of his mind, there were a few questions that needed answers. Who was he? Where was he? How did he get here, into this dark cave? Did he have a name? While he wasn't a fully grown adult, from what he could feel and what he could see, he knew that he had to be at least a teenager. Having reached such an age usually meant that he had an identity. No matter what, he didn't remember anything. Quest added. Where the hell am I? Objective, find information about yourself and your surroundings. Reward. You get to know where you are. Memories of your old body. 500 EXP. Failure, get old and lonely in a dark cave because you are too dumb and lazy. Accept, yes or no. Oh, good. My gamer system is sassy, he thought as he read through the screen with the quest notification that had appeared in front of him and accepted the quest. Since this system is inspired by the gamer ones, it should be quite similar. Status. Name, Harry J. Potter. Class, the gamer. Gender, male. Level, 1. Next level, 0.0%. Title, The Boy Who Lived. Age, 15. Species, human, magical. HP, 110 MP, 55. Strength, 8. Vitality, 9. Intelligence, 9. Wisdom, 7. Dexterity, 10. Charisma, 7. Luck, 7. Points, 0. Okay, I am fucking Harry James Potter. Then, as Harry identified the boy, he realized, as he felt his hair atop his head in confirmation, that it was really unruly and wild. So, that was easy. I know now who I am. First quest done, right? But nothing happened. It would have been too easy if it could have just been solved with a short look into his status screen. Seems like I will have to take a look around, but it's so dark. Wait. Where is my wand? After searching his pockets, he couldn't feel the wand in them, and instead he tried to search the cold stone ground in the darkness of the cave bit by bit for the magical foci. Until he finally touched a long, smooth piece of wood with a rougher handle on one end. Remembering the movement from the movies, he swirled his wand and called out, Lumos. New skill acquired. Wand Lighting Charm, active, LV.1, a charm type spell that illuminates the tip of the caster's wand, allowing the caster to see in the dark. Cost varies based on variation and strength. New skill acquired. Charm Mastery, Novice, Passive, LV1, the mastery of charm work of wizarding magic. Affects casting duration, cost, and mastery of spells falling into the charm school. Charm spells are 0.1% more powerful. The cost of charm spells is 0.01% cheaper. Your control over charms is slightly increased. While he had acquired new skills, the tip of his wand had also lit up, illuminating the surroundings and making the cave better visible. It was a vast and dark space, reminding him of a big room that was empty. Turning around to get a sight of everything, he finally spotted it. Behind him protruded a massive stone dais with an ancient archway standing in the center of it. It gave off an ominous feeling as if there was more to it, but the center of the archway was empty. It looked like he could go through normally. And he felt there should be something. He was sure, he had woken up right in front of the dais on the floor and moved away while searching for his wand. Once again, he approached it, not letting the archway out of his sight. Through continuous observation, a skill to find target information, observe, had been created. Observe. Harry tested out whether he could operate the gamer system through mental commands. Veil of Death, an ancient stone portal connecting the lands of the living with the realm of death. It was created by Death herself for a mysterious reason. This one is currently inactive. Lands, as in multiple. Harry realized as he read through the description, and he finally realized what must have happened. Based on the timeline, this must be right after the events in the Department of Mysteries. Bellatrix had hit Sirius Black with a curse, sending him through the Veil of Death. Harry's current age fits the timeline. He must have rushed after Sirius into the Veil instead of being stopped this time. And somehow he passed through the lands of death and got out into another world. Since he remembers the timeline of the Harry Potter story, this has to be a different world from Harry Potter. The question is, where is Sirius? Did he also pass through the Veil? Quest completed. Where the hell am I? Objective, find information about yourself and your surroundings, completed. Reward. You get to know where you are. Memories of your old body. 500 EXP. Harry Potter's possessions have mysteriously followed him into this world. Level up. All of Harry Potter's memories have been restored. Quest added. Are you serious? Objective, find traces of Sirius Black and get out of the cave. Reward. Whereabouts of Sirius Black? 100 EXP. Failure, you will always wonder in your dark and empty cave, what happened to Sirius? And then it hit him, like a truck filled with a ton of bricks. The memories of this body, every instant of his life up until now. From his shitty childhood to his time in Hogwarts, until the Department of Mysteries. He indeed rushed after Sirius into the Veil of Death. It pretty much is in line with what he knew of the Harry Potter story. Just in much more vivid detail, like what he actually learned in classes, his homework, and so on. Every detail that got skipped while telling a story was included. Shouldn't I get new skills for everything I have learned in the past? And why did I start from level 0, he complained in the hope that he would be able to get something out of it. While passing through the land of death, the player's body has suffered massive damage caused by the removal of a Horcrux. Through the essences, the player's body has been restored but has been reset to level 1. The same goes for your skills. While the player possesses theoretical knowledge of them, he will need to acquire them in a way that the system can track them. Oh, okay. Harry nodded, grateful that he wasn't dead and that he didn't have to worry about being a Horcrux anymore. So the prophecy is fulfilled. It wasn't Voldemort who killed me. Quest added. Fate's bitch, fate doesn't like to be told that she is wrong, fulfill her prophecy, or suffer her displeasure. Objective: destroy the Horcruxes, 2/7. Kill Voldemort. Reward: failure, fate is dissatisfied with you. Wow, there is so much information in there that I don't have any desire to touch it. I will just take it as is and look for a way to kill Voldemort, Harry thought as he saw the quest end. Most likely, who had given it to him, better to check my system before I move on. The skill screen had no surprises for him and gave him a list of skills that he already knew from his previous notifications. He got a map, but it wasn't very big yet and only contained the area he could see in this cave. On his status screen, he could see that he had reached level 2, and now he had 5 stat points that he could freely assign. Making the smart choice, he saved them for now. After all, the gamer could grind stats by training or studying, so why couldn't he do the same? Higher level stats will probably be harder to grind. But on his status screen, he had another idea and decided to use observe on the different entries, gaining more explanation about their functionality. For example, a human, magical, had a level cap of 200. With the highest level for his stats being 1000 per stat. But even more interesting were the other entries. The gamer class is a multi-function class that gains 5 freely assignable stat points per level. It can't be changed. Once a gamer, always a gamer. There are no class limitations on the skills that can be learned. The only skills that are restricted are those with certain requirements, like biological and racial features, other skills, or items. The Boy Who Lived is a title received by Harry Potter for the survival of the killing curse, making him famous in the wizarding world. Plus 10% HP plus 1% charisma. But he also learned what his stats affect and how his HP and MP are calculated. Or that he gains 3 additional stat points for every year of life. Health points: if they fall to 0, you die. HP, 10 plus, 10 * VIT. Mana points: the universal power source of every gamer. Used to cast spells and in skill usage. MP, 10 plus, 5 * int. Strength, increases physical strength and HP regeneration. Vitality, increases HP and resistances to health conditions. Intelligence, increases MP, learning speed, and memory. Wisdom, increases MP regeneration, improves problem solving, and increases wisdom. Dexterity, increases speed and reaction time. Charisma, affects social and romantic interaction. Luck, increases luck and drop chances. His inventory was pretty much a skill in itself. He had a spatial storage ability that could store anything he could hold in his hand. Every object fills one slot, which he doesn't seem to have a limit on. There were already things inside, his whole trunk with his clothes, robes, parchment, ink, some potion ingredients, books, and everything else he had collected was inside. The 2 most outstanding objects were his firebolt, which should still have been chained in Umbridge's office, and his invisibility cloak. And as soon as he saw the cloak, he heard another notification. Quest added. Hallowed be thy name. Are you not interested in what happens once you unite the Deathly Hallows? You never truly saw if there was any truth to the Master of Death. Objective: collect the 3 Deathly Hallows. Elder Wand, 0/1. Resurrection Stone, 0/1. Invisibility Cloak, 1/1. Rewards: failure, decreased affection with death. For his own sanity, and thanks to the help of his gamer's mind, he stayed focused on exploring his system and ignored the whole affection for death part. The remaining function was quite useful too, a codex containing all the information he had collected, from actual complete books that were currently in his inventory to the information in his memory. Pretty much a big media library, based on his memories. And lastly, a notebook, which, of course, had the ability to take notes. But it was more like a complete office suite, including the ability to take screenshots, records, and audio recordings of his 5 senses. Which could be extremely useful. Like a pensieve that he had always had with him. And lastly, there is a quest log that tracks the quests he has currently active. Having spent enough time in this cave, he realized that he had no food besides a few sweets in his trunk that he wanted to save. Harry decided to leave the cave and explore the surroundings. Heading directly for the only exit this big stone room had, a small rift large enough for a human on one end of the wall. Aeon. Chapter 3. Inferius LV 6 HP, 300. What the hell is an Inferius doing in this cave? Sirius, what the hell were you thinking? Harry questioned as he stared at the reanimated dead body wearing rags crawling around the exit of the veil room. Inferi are corpses animated through magic, a piece of magic directly originating from the dark arts, falling into the necromancy category. As far as Harry knew, this kind of magic was something that Voldemort had used during his last war, and the name Inferius was unique to the wizarding world. There were two reasons he could come up with for why an Inferius was here. First of all, someone else who had fallen through the veil before them had created it. Or it was Sirius, who, for some reason, began using the dark arts. Harry himself had no problem using the dark arts right now. They were useful magics. Why wouldn't he use something like a one-hit kill if his life was in danger? He was no longer the original Harry Potter, with those strange moral limitations summarized as dark magic equals evil. No, while he had the memories, body, and identity of Harry Potter, he was a different soul with additional memories and personalities. And he also had a powerful skill like Gamer's Mind, which affected his mentality even more. But Sirius Black was a different matter. While it wasn't impossible that the heir of House Black, a house notorious for its affiliation with the dark arts, had taught them from a young age, his using them was a completely different can of worms. For him to create an Inferius, something drastic must have happened. The Inferius hadn't noticed Harry yet, who still had his wand ready in his hand. Remembering its weakness, he pointed his wand at its clothes, incendio. Its ragged clothes began to burn, melting its skin and HP away before it could even react to him. Bonus damage for natural weakness. 25 EXP gained. Skill acquired. Fire-making spell, active, LV1, a charm-type spell that conjures a jet of flames. Cost varies. Skill acquired. Elemental Mastery, Fire, Novice, Passive, LV1, you are a complete beginner in the usage of fire-type skills, magic, and abilities. Fire skills are 0.1% more powerful. Fire skills are 0.01% cheaper. Your control over fire skills is slightly enhanced. Skill acquired. Casting Mastery, Novice, Passive, LV1, you are a complete beginner in your ability to cast spells and still require a foci that is attuned to you. Charm Mastery, Novice, has leveled up. Loot corpse? Yes or no? Unsure whether he should loot the corpse of an undead, he still chose yes just to see what he got. Inferius LV6 looted. 25 copper pennies gained. Inferius flesh gained. Inferius bones gained. Well, that was pretty much what I expected. Harry mused as he watched the newly acquired items in the inventory. The money is nice, even though it looks pretty medieval. Never heard of copper pennies. And the Inferius parts can be used as ingredients, it seems. As long as he didn't need to dismantle the corpses himself, he would pick up whatever he could. Crafting was always an OP ability in every gamer story, and collecting ingredients was always a good idea. Hopefully, this cave system won't be too large. I wonder how many Inferius there are, Harry thought as he observed his MP. One simple incendio had cost him 10 MP, almost a fifth of his MP bar. He recovered his MP at a rate of 1.2 MP per minute. If he had to face too many Inferi at once, he would be in trouble. And he didn't want to invest his stat points yet. He at least wanted to test whether he could grind them by studying and training, and he did that with the first few. It was only logical to assume that the higher his stats got, the harder it was to grind them without leveling up. Choosing to be careful, he decided to use all the resources he had available to him and pulled his invisible cloak out of his inventory and put it around himself. I should have shut my mouth. Harry thought as he killed another armored Inferius by putting its clothes below its armor on fire. A while ago, these armored Inferi, which were around levels 11 to 16, had begun to appear, often accompanied by a group of 3 to 4 normal Inferi, whose levels ranged from 4 to 10. Only through his cloak and dagger tactic of using his invisibility cloak was he able to progress. Still, these armored Inferi were a good source of old weapons and armor. He had gathered quite a collection of steel armor pieces and different steel swords, axes, spears, and clubs. It was going very slowly. Not only must this cave system be kilometers under the surface since he had been moving upwards for a long time already, but it was also absolutely massive. He had to regularly pause to refill his MP since he still chose not to invest his stat points. On the bright side, he had gained a new skill that allowed him to recover his MP faster. Meditation, active, LV9, while using this skill, your MP regeneration rate is raised by 45%. Physical shock interrupts the meditative state. Harry had been down here for days already, still exploring the cave system for any signs of Sirius or an exit. This made him learn other spells too, like the water-making spell, which also unlocked the transfiguration mastery for him. The water-making spell was an absolute necessity since it was the only source of clean water for him. While he hadn't needed to eat yet, drinking had been a far more pressing essential. After 2 days without it, he had gained his first negative status effect since waking up, which made him recover his MP slower. On the other hand, he didn't really get exhausted as long as he took care of negative status effects. Neither did he feel the need to sleep yet, but Harry suspected that if he went too long without it, he would get another negative status effect. Also, he had leveled up quite a few times already, currently sitting at level 17. He even gained a few free stat points for the massive stress his body was under, which confirmed his theory and made him still save his stat points until it was absolutely necessary. As long as he could kill the inferi hidden under his cloak with only one fire spell, he would press on. Harry walked higher and higher, and instead of getting warmer because he was approaching the surface, the air around him actually became colder. Skill acquired. Cold climate resistance, passive, LV1, your body's ability to adapt and survive in cold climates. 1% resistance to damage from cold weather and its negative status effects. 1% resistance from cold and frost-based attacks. Does that mean that I am in a cold climate region? Or is it just cold in this particular area of the cave system? Harry mused as he saw the skill notification. Anyways, resistance skills are always useful. Soon he arrived in a large circular cave. On the other side of the room, he could make out a large closed iron gate. He didn't run directly towards the gate since it wasn't that simple to reach it. Inferius Giant LV 25 HP, 5000. 5000 fucking HP for a level 25. Harry's eyes went wide as he saw that number. I would need a VIT stat of 499 for that. It probably has racial advantages and skills that allow it to become such a walking tank. Inferius or not, it also looked different from the giants he was familiar with. This one looked like an adult but was at least 1 meter smaller than Grop, Hagrid's half-brother, who was a small giant and got bullied out of his tribe for it. But it didn't change that it would be problematic to beat. It could easily kill him in one hit with that massive wooden club it was carrying. The giants of his world had an innate resistance to magic, even more so in Inferius. Besides fire magic, most spells have no effect on them since inferi are nothing more than reanimated corpses resistant to pain. But 5000 HP would be hard to take care of in one shot, with a simple spell like the fire-making spell. Unfortunately, there was not much of a choice, he was simply under-leveled for more than the basic spells. It wasn't like he hadn't tried to cast a few more powerful fire-based spells, like the Blasting Curse Conf Ringo or the Fire Rope spell. But every time he got a notification, spell casting failed. Charm Mastery, Apprentice, or even Charm Mastery, Expert, is needed to cast the spell successfully. He could always sneak around the giant using his invisible cloak and try to open the iron gate before it noticed him. But he had the feeling that the gate wouldn't budge. And then Harry realized that the cave room was quite large and high. He didn't have to face it in a direct battle, inferi weren't sentient anyway. They were more like programmed puppets to react in a specific way if they didn't receive new orders. Summoning his broom from his inventory and storing his invisible cloak back so he wouldn't lose it, he jumped from the ground into the air. And not a moment too late, as soon as he was airborne, more inferi and armored inferi appeared from rifts and cracks hidden all over the walls of the room. This was an absolute death trap for anyone on the ground. He began to target the inferi all over the room by setting them on fire. It was good that his broom was not using his own MP, but the environmental magic. All of the inferi could see him and were following him as he was flying around the room, and he began to round them up into a group so the fire would spread amongst them, effectively letting them kill each other. It was also fortunate that he gained a level up twice during this battle, speeding up the killing process as each level up restored his HP and MP. Then he remembered his first year and pointed his wand at the massive wooden club the giant Inferius was holding, always swinging at him if he flew too close. While the room was relatively high and big, it was still quite close to the range of the club. Wingardium Leviosa! Harry shouted, and the club began to fly out of the hand of the giant Inferius. Once Harry cancelled the spell, this heavy club directly fell into the crowd of burning inferi, squashing 4 or 5 of them directly under it. It was enough to absolutely kill them since their bodies had been completely made into meat paste. Skill acquired. Levitation Charm, active, LV1, a charm-type spell allowing the caster to make objects fly. It took Harry over an hour to kill all the inferi in the room, including the giant one. Mostly, his tactic consisted of creating a big pyre of smaller inferi while keeping the bigger one in it and slowly burning its HP into ashes. He actually lost some HP because of smoke poisoning. Harry had to use some of his clothes to cover his mouth and nose and, from time to time, dive deeper into the range of the inferi to get a breath of fresh air. Unfortunately, the bubblehead charm required charm mastery, apprentice, to cast. The whole battle was risky, making the next prompt from the system a no-brainer. Level up. Loot corpses? Yes or no? 129x inferius looted. 57 silver stags and 33 copper pennies gained. 34x inferius flesh gained. 39x inferius bones gained. 88x inferius ashes gained. 34 armored inferius looted. 30 silver stags and 20 copper pennies gained. 9x inferius flesh gained. 12x inferius bones gained. 16x inferius ashes gained. 11x rusty steel armor gained. 9 rusty steel swords gained. 5x rusty steel axes gained. 6x rusty steel spears gained. 15x molten steel clump gained. 1 inferius giant LV25 looted. 1x giant bones. 1x rotten giant flesh. 1x rotten giant heart. 1x magic most evil. 1x letter from Sirius. 1x rusted key. That's a lot, Harry muttered, but there was one thing that caught his attention instantly as he pulled it out of his inventory. Dear Harry. While I hope someone stopped you from running into the Vale after me, I still left this letter just in case. It's been a while, well, for you, probably not so much. But for me, it has pretty much been my whole life. If you read this, then I am already dead. I have no idea how long it has been since I put a ton of charms on this piece of paper to make it last. First of all, you are no longer on Earth. It took me an uncomfortably long time to figure this out. The Vale of Death is on a currently unpopulated island, a few kilometers east of the mainland, up in the northern part of the continent. In our language, they call it the Island Stone. A fitting description, if you ask me. One of the first problems you will face is the language barrier. These people speak a different language from our own. On the back of this letter, you will find a charm that allows you to learn any language quickly. It can also be used to teach someone else. I wrote this letter in my old age. Don't worry about me, pup. I lived a long and fulfilling life. I have a loving family and a home. I even became the leader of my people. My children, especially my son Brandon, are magical, and I have taught them everything I know. While I have no idea how many generations my magical blood will last, I created a copy of every book I knew and left it with my descendants. A small warning, there is magic in this world, though in different forms, but we are able to learn it. The magic users of this world can tame and control animals, have a form of divination, and scry, but there are also other vile magics like sacrificial blood magic. During my life, I met a multitude of magical beings, including giants, the children of the forest, dragons, the deep ones, and more. Be especially wary of the ice necromancers up at the northern pole of this planet. I never ventured far there, since this is their land, but there is something absolutely vile and dark up there. I have half a mind to put a big wall between them and myself. I was born as a black, I know what I am talking about. Although I changed my name, I chose a new one to leave a better legacy for myself. My greatest regret is that I won't be able to see you again, pup. I have instructed my descendants to leave the letter in the cave and ensure that it's guarded so that no one will use the veil. This is a new opportunity for you. A completely new world for you to explore. No longer bound to your fame and the prejudices of the wizarding world. For your parents, Moonies, and my sake, live your life to the fullest. Like I did, make me proud, pup. Mischief managed. Sirius Stark, formerly Black. P.S. Look after my descendants if they are still around. For 20 and more advanced chapters check out https://www.pat*rayon.com/senseicaffeine. For actual news check on my socials, https://linktree.ee/senseicaffeine. Please leave your power stones, it helps. Comment. 11 Comment. Vote. Chapter 4. Quest completed. Are you serious? Objective. Find traces of Sirius Black and get out of the cave, completed. Reward. Whereabouts of Sirius Black. 100 EXP. New skill. New skills acquired. ID Create, active, LV1, a skill enabling you to create an instant dungeon. A parallel pocket of space. Anything inside doesn't exist in the real world besides the experience itself. A higher level allows the user to create better ones. Currently available. Empty. Inferi. ID Escape, active, LV1, a skill enabling you to leave instant dungeons. Quest added. Sirius's last will. Sirius died years ago. But he left his last will with you and has always been tough on you. You are not the original Harry Potter, but maybe there is something left of him in you. Objective: find Sirius's descendants and establish a relationship with them. The choice is yours. Reward: 1000 EXP. Failure: never gained opportunities. Sirius's wish. Sirius died years ago. But he never forgot you. He wishes for your happiness. Objective: build yourself a home. Reward: 5000 EXP. Failure: remain homeless and alone. Logically speaking, Sirius's letter shouldn't have any effect on him, not only because while he was inhabiting the body of Harry Potter, he wasn't exactly him. Additionally, his gamer's mental skill should suppress any such strains, but for some reason, a tear was running down his cheek as he put the letter away and closed the notifications. It also gave him some answers, or at least a good guess, as to why this cave was filled with inferi. At least one of Sirius's descendants must have felt that inferi were a good way to guard this cave. He could respect the notion, it was a dark and cold place, perfect to keep inferi. Honestly, he was just happy that there hadn't been any traps or wards. With his low understanding of magic as a level 1 gamer, he would have had a hard time surviving it. The ID Create skill was a massive boon, ensuring the possibility of always having a way to level up and train his skills. Still, it was weaker than the original he remembered from the Manhway. His skill stated clearly that there were no item drops from it, which was one of the broken effects of the original. Magic Most Evil, he remembers this book. Not from Harry's memories, he had yet to encounter this book. Actually, he did. Coincidentally, it was the book Harry had picked up during his first year as he snuck into the restricted section in order to find information about Nicholas Flamel. It had an alarm charm on it that caused it to shout when picked up unauthorized. But more importantly, it was the book Hermione had checked in order to find information about Horcruxes. It contained all kinds of dark magic, but only a side note on Horcruxes. While Harry had no interest in Horcruxes, damaging ones never sounded like a smart idea. The dark arts were useful since they were quite powerful. In his mind, there is no evil, only how you use it. And he was in an unknown world with dragons and ice necromancers, also, the whole multiverse was open to him. So obviously, he would have no problems with dark arts. All of this wasn't important at the moment, he needed to get something in his stomach. He was running out of sweets, and a stable food source was important for his survival. After all, according to Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, food couldn't be created from nothing. After ensuring there was nothing he had missed in that large cave, he approached the heavy iron door. When he tried to open it, he realized it was locked. Pointing his wand at it, he said, "Alohomora." New skill acquired. Unlocking Charm, active, LV1, a charm-type spell allowing the caster to unlock objects like doors and windows. A higher level allows unlocking stronger locks. The target resisted the spell. Of course it resisted the spell. My gut feeling was right. Harry thought as he summoned the rusty key out of his inventory and tried to put it into the lock. It fit. With a bit of force, he managed to open that ancient-looking iron door and push it open. Sunlight shone onto his face as he breathed the fresh but cold air of the surface. It really looked like he was somewhere with a cold climate, as patches of snow were covering the stony ground. The area was mountainous and stony, and the plant life was sparse. Still in the distance, on some hills, he could make out some hairy animals. Before he could head out, a prickling feeling on the back of his neck caught his attention. Turning around, he realized that the feeling came from the iron door he just passed. Observe. An ancient iron door was enchanted with Notice Me Not and Muggle wards thousands of years ago, hiding its existence from non-magicals. Over time, the magic became more powerful. New skills acquired. Magic Sensitivity, passive, LV1, the user is able to sense more powerful feats of magic. Warding Mastery, novice, Passive, LV1, you are a complete beginner in the art of warding. You are able to create and understand simple wards. Your wards are 0.1% more powerful. Your wards are 0.01% cheaper to erect. Your control and understanding of warding magic have slightly increased. Okay, that's useful. Unfortunately, I don't know any wards or how to cast them. Hopefully, my school books have some in them. It's good to know that encountering and studying magic also grants skill. Harry thought as he read through the notifications, since the cave is hidden from non-magicals, it makes a good hideout. He decided before he headed out into the wilderness. Who are you, stranger? Shouted a large, hairy man wearing pelts and leather armor with his hand on his axe. His equally hairy companion also had his hand on his weapon. Unpopulated, my ass. I should have worn my invisibility cloak. Harry cursed mentally, at least my merchant's tongue skill seems to be working. That felt strange, learning a completely new language instantly. I won't need Sirius's spell. I mean no harm. Just a traveler exploring this island. A traveler on Skagos. Snorted the man with his thick accented voice, a bit of disbelief in his voice. Who are you fooling, southerner? Where are your weapons? I am unarmed. I mean no harm. Harry said, showing his empty hands, I really want to learn more about your people. To learn about our people, you want? The man questioned with a strange glint in his eyes, his hand still hovering above his axe. He was observing Harry carefully for any sign of a lie. Observe. Name, Baron. Gender, male. Occupation, hunter. Level, 21. Age, 36. Race, human, first men. HP, 640 MP, 65. STR, 64 VIT, 63. Int, 12 WIS, 8. Dex, 43 Cha, 10. LCK, 20. Description, a native hunter of Skagos under House Stain. Since their rebellion, the people have become even more isolated from the rest of the world. The lack of trade and their backwardness made practices like cannibalism common even outside of winter. Great, of course I landed on an island of cannibals. Harry sighed. This moment of distraction was enough to trigger the two men to grab their axes and sprint at him. But Harry was ready, in less than a second, he could equip his wand from his inventory. The last few days of fighting in the cave system of the Veil of Death were enough to make him quite an adept in the art. Expelliarmus! Expelliarmus! He cast quickly, knocking their axes out of their hands and sending them flying behind them onto the ground. New skills acquired. Disarming Charm, active, LV1, a combat charm type spell allowing the user to disarm the target. Combat Magic Mastery, Novice, passive, LV1, you are a complete beginner in combat magic, which includes all types of spells, including offensive and defensive applications. Combat spells are 0.1% more powerful. The cost of combat spells is 0.01% cheaper. Your control over combat magic is slightly increased. Harry didn't get distracted, the two men were still a danger to him. Sorcerer! Demon! One of the men cried out in fear as he turned around, ready to flee at the sight of magic. Unfortunately, Harry had no intention of letting them escape. They were too valuable for him, and he didn't want to alarm the other inhabitants of the island with his presence and strength. Sorry, now it's too late for you guys. Petrificus totalis! Petrificus totalis! 2 flashes of light later, and the men were paralyzed and stiff like boards on the ground. New skills acquired. Full Body Bind Curse, active, LV1, a dark charm that temporarily paralyzes the opponent. Dark Magic Mastery, Novice, passive, LV1, you are a complete beginner in the dark arts, which includes the different dark charms, jinxes, hexes, and curses, but also a multitude of rituals, potions, poisons, and enchantments. Dark Magic. The Full Body Bind. Harry was in disbelief as he read the notification, and another spell that falls into multiple categories of mastery. Do they stack? Yes. The effects of passive abilities stack. The Full Body Bind is technically dark magic since it is a curse. It follows the same mechanical principles as other darker curses. Dark magic is just a broad categorization of spells following similar principles. Hey, you never learn enough. Well, good for me. It's easier to level up dark magic. It was a requirement to learn the skills in magic most evil. Harry shrugged his shoulders as he turned his attention towards his fallen foes, checking the other notifications. 400 EXP received. Loot LV21 Baron and LV19 Huld? Yes or no? Will they be naked? Harry wondered. No, the standard setting for the loot feature is to leave the used clothes on. Only armor pieces will be stripped. Right, there was such a setting. Harry remembered when he experimented with the system the first time a few days ago in the Veil Chamber, as he chose yes. LV21, Baron looted. 1x full set of leather armor. 1x steel axe. 1x steel knife. 1x hunting bow. 32x steel arrows. 13x dried arak meat. 1x bread. 1x skin of ale. LV19 Huld looted. 1x full set of leather armor. 1x steel axe. 1x steel knife. 1x hunting bow. 12x steel arrows. 15x dried arak meat. 2x bread. 1x skin of ale. Hey, good enough. That solves my immediate food problem. The dark-haired boy thought as he saw the food items appear in his inventory. The question is, how should I make sure that they don't escape? I don't have any ropes, and the body bind is only temporary. Unfortunately, I am too weak for more powerful spells that could bind them long-term. Suddenly, he had an idea. Pulling one of the leather armors out of his inventory and one of the knives, Harry began to cut the shirt of the armor into long, thick strips. Leather bindings X4 crafted. New skill acquired. Crafting Mastery, Novice, Active/Passive, LV1, you are a complete beginner in all crafts. Your understanding of creating things is superficial. The success rate for all crafts rose by 0.1%. 0.01% chance to create an object of higher quality. Known recipes, 1. Sub-skills. Craft, active create something out of the required items based on the recipe. Harry bound the arms and feet of the men so they couldn't flee and levitated them to the cave, where he decided to make his hideout. It was fine that these men were cannibals, that wouldn't cause him any moral conflicts when he was using them to grind his skills after eating something. He realized he was far too weak yet. Had one of them stayed hidden and used his bow, Harry would have died and probably ended up as a meal. But now that he had food for a few days, he didn't really need to feed them since he didn't expect them to live long. Their usefulness was to act as living targets to level up and test his magic, as well as a source of information. A look at his status tells him there was a lot he had to do. Name, Harry J. Potter. Class, the gamer. Gender, male. Level, 20. Next level, 1.3%. Title, The Boy Who Lived. Age, 15. Species, human, magical. HP, 130 MP, 55. Strength, 10. Vitality, 11. Intelligence, 9. Wisdom, 7. Dexterity, 11. Charisma, 7. Luck, 7. Points, 95. Chapter 5. Skagos was primitive. The Skagosi were a bunch of savages, barely able to keep themselves alive. Their most advanced populace were the handful of blacksmiths who acted as the backbone of their society. It was no joke that these blacksmiths were solely the people who kept the whole economy running. The tools they created were the tools these people used to feed themselves. Their farming culture was horrendous and often unprofitable because their stronger people outright robbed the farmers of their produce. After spending the last few months on Skagos, it was no wonder to Harry that these people resorted to outright cannibalizing the weaker members of their society and anyone who had the unfortunate fate of stranding on this big island. And this was unfortunate. Skagos and the unpopulated island of Skane beside it were not small by any means. According to Harry's calculations, it was about the size of Ireland, so it was a small country in itself. With better technologies and structures, it could actually become a decent country in itself. But its savagery and primitive ways had left a mark on the development of the people. Harry had spent a lot of time exploring Skagos and learning about the world as much as he could. It wasn't easy in a backward and isolated region like Skagos since the number of books they had was small. But Harry didn't want to leave his now safe grinding spot. A base that couldn't be located was a valuable advantage, especially if one wrong arrow could kill you. Even with magic, he wasn't a god, and no matter what opinion the wizards of Wizarding Britain had about non-magicals, it was a fact that a surprise attack or a group large enough could kill a wizard. So Harry grinned and learned. After confirming that all of the Skagosi, besides some of the children, had practiced cannibalism at least once in their lives, he stopped any notion of being humane towards them. To change the ways of the Skagosi, something drastic had to happen, and while cannibalism was one of the worst crimes, they had a few other practices that were just as savage. There is a long tradition of raiding, human sacrifices, and even slavery. While raiding and slavery were no longer present, since they feared to invade the north, they still sacrificed humans to their weirwood trees and their old gods. The north was a country, or rather a state of a larger country, they were technically part of. But since they rebelled around 100 years ago, where they had been harshly defeated with thousands of deaths, they had isolated themselves from the rest of the world. He didn't stop there, he wanted to learn more about the world. He knew about the Seven Kingdoms, its general history, although he was unsure who was the current king, and about other continents like Essos. Harry even learned that Sirius descendants were still around and doing quite well for themselves. The Starks once were the kings of the north, who had subdued the Skagosi in ancient times. These days, they are Lord Paramounts, governing over the north, the largest region of the Seven Kingdoms, under the king on the Iron Throne. Harry had learned all this from the books he could gather on this island. He often used his invisibility cloak to sneak into the different towns and small forts where their lords were ruling and stole whatever he felt was useful. If he encounters a small party, he takes them out and brings them back to his concealed cave, where he uses them as target practice to grind his skills. He has spent months on Skagos grinding and leveling, using his instant dungeons and the Skagosi themselves. He actually unlocked a few more ID types. ID Create, Active, LV11, a skill enabling you to create an instant dungeon, a parallel pocket of space. Anything inside doesn't exist in the real world besides the experience itself. A higher level allows the user to create better ones. Currently available. 1 empty instance, monster inside, none. 2 inferi instance, monster inside, inferi, armored inferi, giant inferi. 3 wildlife instance, monster inside, dogs, bears, shadow cats, dire wolves, etc. 4 giants instance, monster inside, giants. 5 training instance, monster inside, none, effect, increased gravity. Pretty much every 2 to 3 levels he had unlocked a new instance to use. But leveling the skill was far slower than any other one, even while he used it daily. These instances were very useful for grinding levels and leveling simple combat spells and masteries. The training instance was especially useful to grind his physical stats. His first grade grind plan was coming to fruition. Name, Harry J. Potter. Class, the gamer. Gender, male. Level, 64. Next level, 68.5%. Title, The Boy Who Lived. Age, 16. Species, human, magical. HP, 360 MP, 155. Strength, 44. Vitality, 35. Intelligence, 29. Wisdom, 21. Dexterity, 47. Charisma, 10. Luck, 7. Points, 318. While on paper he was probably the weakest level 64 character one would ever encounter, his assigned stat points were still the ones of a 16-year-old level 29 character. Which was the level of a strong soldier in this world. The average adult warrior ranges from level 15 to 30. While the elite, from what he could guess and see, were around 30 to 50, the strongest humans are probably in their 60s or 70s. Every race had a level cap, and the cap for human, first men, to which these northerners belonged, was at level 100, while their stats maxed out at 500. If you include all of Harry's stat points, he was sitting on the stats of a 16-year-old level 92 human. Already at the peak of this world, if you only consider a one-on-one battle. Could Harry take on 100 men at once if he invested all his stat points? Maybe, if the situation is right. A full army? No. At least not alone, even if he had grinned his skills out. Some of his skills required a human target and a lot of groundwork. For example, for him to be able to use legilimency, he needed Charms Mastery, Expert. He also found out that spells originating from the wizarding world maxed out at level 100, but different skills could grow more. His skills were the result of his hard work. Skill list. Spells. Wand Lighting Charm, Active, LV. Max. Fire Making Spell, Active, LV. Max. Water Making Spell, active, LV. Max. Levitation charm, active, LV. Max. Unlocking charm, active, LV 56. Disarming charm, active, LV. Max. Full body bind curse, active, LV. Max. Leg locker curse, active, LV. Max. Cutting curse, active, LV. Max. Blasting curse, active, LV. Max. Bombardment spell, active, LV. Max. Shield charm, active, LV. Max. Sectum sempra, active, LV. Max. Blood boiling curse, active, LV 35. Create inferius, active, LV 78. Imperious curse, active, LV. Max. Cruciatus curse, active, LV 45. Killing curse, active, LV 13. Skills. Gamer's mind, passive, LV. Max. Gamer's body, passive, LV. Max. Interdimensional trader, active/passive, LV1. Contract, active, LV. Max. Merchant's tongue, passive, LV. Max. Observe, active, LV 113. Meditation, active, LV 132. Magic sensitivity, passive, LV 78. Masteries. Charm mastery, master, passive, LV .67. Transfiguration mastery, expert, passive, LV 31. Casting mastery, expert, passive, LV 54. Warding mastery, apprentice, passive, LV 33. Dark magic mastery, expert, passive, LV 15. Mind magic mastery, expert, passive, LV 12. Runes mastery, apprentice, passive, LV 42. Arithmancy mastery, novice, passive, LV 73. Ritual mastery, apprentice, passive, LV 23. Combat magic mastery, master, passive, LV 7. Divination mastery, novice, passive, LV 57. Elemental mastery, fire, expert, passive, LV 31. Elemental mastery, water, expert, passive, LV 23. Elemental mastery, wind, apprentice, passive, LV 81. Elemental mastery, earth, apprentice, passive, LV 43. Elemental mastery, lightning, expert, passive, LV 61. Elemental mastery, light, novice, passive, LV 91. Elemental mastery, darkness, novice, passive, LV 41. Crafting mastery, novice, active/passive, LV 35. Resistances. Cold climate resistance, passive, LV 13. Frost resistance, passive, LV 3. Poison resistance, passive, LV 2. Fire resistance, passive, LV 4. Physical damage resistance, passive, LV 3. Magic resistance, passive, LV 2. The hardest things to level up were his resistances, since he actually had to endure a damage type for them. As a wizard fighting from a distance and employing hiding tactics, it was hard to level them up. And even if they were super useful, he had no interest in causing himself pain, especially since they level so slowly. After them came the skills, he simply lacked the resources to level up. For example, crafting is a super powerful skill, but you could only craft leather bindings or other trash so often before you had to look for more materials. Especially since each recipe yielded diminishing returns. Harry had a similar problem with quite a few of his other magic masters. A spell gave only experience to mastery before reaching max level. Once he maxed out a spell, that's it. His method of leveling was to pick out a random spell from his memories or the books he had and grind them by killing enemies with it or practicing them on one of his guests. By now, he had run out of the spells he knew, including variations, duo, trio, maxima. He had gained divination mastery because in his book were some scrying spells, but as soon as they were maxed out, he had nothing to level the skill further. His masteries were nowhere at their limit, but he had no more magic to learn besides a few deadly spells that were exhausting to cast with his current mana reserves, killing curse, or that required a specific condition like a living target, which some curses can change fast, blood-boiling curse. The Cruciatus curse was especially annoying to level since, as soon as the target snapped, it was useless as a practice object. Either he finds a few more spells with their incantations or creates his own. Both of them were easier said than done while being in a different dimension from the wizarding world. But the truth was that his mastery still had a lot of room to grow. Each stage of mastery had 100 levels and became increasingly powerful. While the maxed out novice mastery of transfiguration made his spells only 10% more powerful and 1% cheaper to cast, the apprentice level made them already 60% more powerful and 6% cheaper. Each rank is increasing even more. The highest rank he reached was master, but according to his observe skill, there were a few more. It went like this: novice, apprentice, expert, master, legendary, mythical. And let's be honest, if he reaches the level of Dumbledore or Voldemort, was he really strong on the bigger scale? Could he beat an army? Maybe one of these worlds. But in the multiverse? Could Dumbledore beat Goku? No way. His greatest disappointments were the unforgivable. In the wizarding world, they were very powerful, but in front of someone stronger than you? It simply cannot resist them. But grinding his magic was a good start. Still just a start. He hadn't even started out with his dimensional store yet. First of all, he needed a location. His cave was nice and hidden and all, but in the end, it was only a cave. Harry needed a power base, a business costs money. Dimensional, even more so. What should he do if someone visits his store and wants to sell some powerful weapons? After months of grinding, he couldn't even afford a Valyrian steel sword if someone were to sell it, so how would he afford an actual enchanted weapon or something even more powerful? No, he needed his own territory. Somewhere, he could have his own productive economy and an income as a start for his dimensional business. And that was his next step. In fact, he had already been preparing for a while. Whoever had left the copy of Magic Most Evil that Sirius wrote down had helped Harry massively. It was a book about the dark arts, split into 3 sections. The first section and largest one were a collection of different dark charms, mostly curses, which had been extremely helpful to level up his dark magic mastery. The second section was something he couldn't really use since it consisted of different dark potion and poison recipes. He simply doesn't have the materials to use them. While he possesses a few potion ingredients from Harry's possession that he received as his first quest reward, he could even plant some of them to actually grow them. Most of them had no use for such advanced and dark potions. Additionally, he hadn't found the right location for a greenhouse yet. His cave wasn't a good fit. For him, the last section had the greatest value. It consisted of different rituals of a darker nature that were very useful. Like a scorched earth ritual, turning land inhospitable, or the complete opposite of a vitality ritual that uses human sacrifice to empower the land, different dark empowerment rituals, weapon enchantment rituals, and so on. But the most important one was the inferius ritual. The ability to revive a corpse into an inferius that you could instruct to follow your commands. None of his practice targets had gone to waste. Everyone he captured underwent a similar process. First, Harry used them to practice spells that didn't kill them, like different harmless cures, legilimency, obliviate, and so on. After they stopped giving him any experience for such skills, he used them to practice more lethal curses and spells, like the blood-boiling curse, the Cruciatus curse, the flaying curse, and so on. If they were alive after that, he would finish them off with the killing curse. But Harry wasn't done with them. Why let a perfectly fine corpse go to waste? After his skills and masteries had reached a high enough level, he began to use the inferius ritual on them. Using every last one of these cannibals to turn them into a part of his army. It already became so obvious that people were disappearing, and nobody knew why. Besides a few strange sightings, they had names for him based on the local folklore. The thing that came in the night they are calling him. Sirius' idea of creating a big wall up north had actually been realized by one of his descendants. Most likely his son, Brandon Stark, but the records were a bit unclear. Along that massive wall over 200 meters high, made of mostly ice and magic, were 19 castles. One of them is called the Night Fort. Long ago, multiple apprentice boys at the Night Fort claimed to have seen something that came in the night, but their descriptions of it differed when they informed their Lord Commander. 3 boys died within a year, and a 4th went mad. The thing is said to have returned a century later, this time with the apprentices shambling behind it in chains. Which was actually a pretty accurate description of what he was doing, the only difference being that his inferi weren't in any visible chains. By turning the daily 3 to 5 Skagosi into inferi, he had amassed an army of over 600 of them. Considering that the total population of Skagos was a bit more than 50,000, it was a considerable amount. While humans were outnumbering him, he didn't plan to face them in a direct battle. Also, inferi were hard to kill without fire. You would have to completely smash every part of its body into paste to actually kill one. And fire wasn't easy to weaponize with the current level of technology on the island. Having a torch doesn't mean you could burn an inferi with it. Was he aware that he was pretty much acting like a Dark Lord in the wizarding world? Sure. Did he care? Of course not. The soul inhabiting the body of Harry Potter wasn't Harry Potter, even if he received his memories. In truth, the memories had accomplished the opposite. Having memories of over a decade of abuse and loneliness had caused him to view the world more as Tom Riddle than Harry Potter. Harry Potter was the strange one to act like a hero after everything he had experienced. And a skill like Gamer's Mind, which was limiting the mental impact of a deed like torturing a human or turning his corpse into an undead corpse robot animated by magic, didn't help turn him more humane. This new Harry Potter would use everything in his power to ensure his own growth and survival. He wouldn't go out of his way to be evil, but if it came to his own survival, he would be ruthless. Turning a few cannibals into inferi was nothing. While he received a new chance at life, he remembers dying. He remembers the void. Chapter 6. Sigorn Magnar POV. Why have the old gods abandoned us? Are our sacrifices worth nothing? Sigorn, the head of House Magnar, asked himself as he observed the darkness surrounding the wooden walls he was standing on. Fear crept down his spine as he heard growls and rustling out in the dark. House Magnar was the strongest and oldest of the 3 houses on Skagos. They could trace their ancestry back to Ibn, when their people first arrived on these shores. And now here he was, the head of such an old house that had braved so many threats during the last millennia, cowering behind his walls. He was hoping that they would protect them from the evil that was coming for them. It all started over half a year ago, when more and more hunting parties began to disappear around the ancient mountains. Never to be seen again. They believed that some vicious beast had made its lair and killed all the hunters entering its territory. But the situation had changed again. During the nights, the people in different villages had heard and seen things no one could explain. Steps where no one was. Supplies that were disappearing. Voices without an origin. Flashes of colored lights. Then people began to disappear. The strongest of their men were gone without any trace. The whole night, patrols were gone. No one had seen them leave. It was as if they had been swallowed by the earth itself. No steps or tracks. Nothing. The elders called it the thing that came in the night, an ancient evil from the night fort that awoke on Skagos, now haunting and hunting their people. And nothing they did worked. No matter how many guards they had, how many torches, or which walls the thing that came, no matter what came in the night, always managed to get them. And all of that had been just the beginning. The beginning of the end for Skagos. 1 month, the true end was initiated. It started one night when a whole village disappeared. Then another. And another. The inhabitants of one settlement after the other disappeared. Hiding helped nothing. A few reports talked about shadows grabbing the people and bringing them away. Others say everyone in a village disappeared at once. And again, others talked about fights, the reanimated undead slaves of the others attacking the villages, and the people joining their legions. But things got even scarier for the people of Skagos. A few days after the people of the first village disappeared, a part of them suddenly returned. None of them could answer what had happened to them or who the rest of the people were. A good third of the village was missing. The same thing repeated itself with the other villages. While other villages disappeared, a part of the missing population reappeared and acted as if nothing was wrong. While everyone else was scared, the returned people simply lived their lives. None of them reacted to the orders of their lords. None of them joined the host Sigorn had gathered at his wooden fort in order to face the darkness haunting their land. They didn't acknowledge his orders at all. If he survived whatever was coming, they would all pay dearly. They were next. His family seat, the King's house, was the last settlement of his land, not targeted by the unknown threat. Sigorn and his men would face the whites, the others, or whatever the thing that comes in the night is. They would stand tall, like his ancestors did during the last millennia. In his hopelessness, he had even tried to send men to contact the Starks and other northern houses. What was their pride against such an enemy? But it was hopeless. The men he had sent out never reached the oceans. Any boat they possessed disappeared after that. And here they were, in the midst of the night, standing on the wooden walls of the king house, waiting for the enemy. The light of their torches illuminated the inner parts of the wooden fort but was unable to spread outside of it. Night had swallowed the surrounding land. Sigorn could clearly make out movement in the dark, as if an army were encircling them. But how could the enemy see in the dark? There were no torches. What foul magics were these? And suddenly, everything went so fast. Grow on! Sigorn heard it from overhead. Before he could realize what had happened, something landed on the walls. Bodies. The enemy had somehow catapulted a bundle of bodies onto their walls. Are these our people? Is this an intimidation tactic? As if that would work, just some meat for the men. Sigorn scoffed in contempt as he watched the corpses splatter all over the fort. This lasted only for a moment. Once he realized that these corpses were actually moving, he froze in terror. Fear gripped his whole being. The enemy. The living death had already broken through their fortifications. The Sigorn attempted to shout, in order to rally his men for the fight. But before a word even properly went over his lips, he was overshadowed by a resounding booming noise. Wood and debris of the gate flew all over the area. Some of his men were hit, others were already jumped at by the living dead already inside the wall. And more came. Thousands of running corpses rushed through the destroyed gate. Sigorn could see it. His men had already lost the will to fight. The sight of the foe, that overpowering and unnatural strength, had broken them. Fight, maggots! He cried out as he brandished his sword and rushed at the incoming horde running up the stairs towards their heightened position. Are you not men enough to face these deaths with pride? Let's show these stinking corpses how powerful we Skagosi are. And there was the first one, a rotting man with his face half destroyed. Sigorn could have sworn he had seen him before, but before he could think more about it, the walking corpse was already upon him. With a swish of a sword he cut the head cleanly off from the torso, and was already ready to face the next one. Only the corpse didn't stop. It continued to attack him and jumped onto him, sending him down the wall into the mass of walking corpses. This is my end. He realized, as he impacted the ground amongst these corpses who all began to claw at him. But instead of ripping him apart, they grabbed him and dragged him somewhere outside the wall through the mass of corpses. It didn't take long until they stopped asking, "What's happening?" He wondered when he heard a voice. "Ah, Sigorn, head of House Magnar. What a surprise for you to be the first one brought in front of me," a smooth male voice said. Sigorn got pulled up by the undead, still tightly held, and faced whoever had spoken. It was a young man. "I have not even reached adulthood yet." The boy resembled more one of these southern cunts he had seen while visiting Eastwatch for trade than a proper Northman. He had wild night black hair and a thin but handsome face, and there were traces of a scar on his forehead. But his most outstanding feature was his glowing, deep emerald eyes. "Are you the leader of these fights? What is this folly? Are you trying to deceive me, White Walker?" Sigorn questioned him, not letting his fear rule him. "A White Walker? One of those others?" The young man said with a sly smirk, "No, I am not one of the legendary others. What do you want? Why are you attacking my people?" Sigorn asked scornfully. "Good question. I want Skagos," the boy answered simply. "You think the Skagosi will kneel in front of you? Are you mad? You may be powerful, but we still have our pride," shouted Sigorn as he spat on the floor. "Harmond, the head of House Stain, said something similar last night. In the end, he chose to join my army," laughed the boy, as Sigorn realized where he had seen that undead that he had beheaded. "Anyway, like anyone else on Skagos, you get the choice. You can join my army of the dead, it's grown quite a bit. Or you can sign this." With a slight glow, paper appeared in the boy's hand. It looked like a contract with an empty spot at the bottom for him to sign. Sigorn didn't even need to read it before he shouted, "As if I would sign any of your foul sorcery. You hear me? I may die and become a pawn in your vile army. But I curse you, boy. You wretched devil, I curse you." "Too bad," the boy muttered before he heard words in a language he didn't know, Avada Kedavra. The last thing he saw was a bright green light flying at him. Harry Potter POV. Level up. Conquest successful, Skagos and Skane have become your territories. The faction and territory screens are now available. The moment the body of Sigorn of House Magnar fell to the ground, he received these notifications. He had finally gained his own territory. He pointed his wand at the dead body with wide, open eyes on the ground. And a runic circle began to appear around it. When his create inferi skill was at a lower level, he literally had to carve every rune by himself, which had been a pain in the ass to repeat a few hundred times. It was good that at skill level 25, the runic circle became simpler, and at level 50, it became completely automatic. A short, dark, ugly green glow later, the body of Sigorn was raised from the dead and joined his army of inferi. It was maddening that he had to offer the choice another few hundred times today. But fortunately, this was the last settlement on Skagos. Faction, Harry said with clear intent to open the window, and a completely unfamiliar screen appeared. Faction, Harry Potter's faction, temporary name. Number of members, 51,362 total, 35,384 human, 32,319 enslaved, 3,065 young children, 15,978 inferi. Locations, Skagos and Skane, 21 villages, 4 towns, 3 forts, King Shouse, Deep Down, Driftwood Hall. Buildings, none noteworthy, see details. Funds, 3,192 gold dragons. Troops, 15,978 inferi. This system was quite useful. Not only did it summarize all the necessary information about his territory and people, he could even use it to manage it. Well, at least his inferi could be controlled through it. Humans had to be ordered regularly. Harry had pretty much used the power of his contracts to enslave the current population of Skagos. That skill had one weakness: the contract had to be signed out of free will. Free will, as in not under the Imperious curse, and blackmail like sign it or die were valid methods. This had been a massive task during the last month. He would use every night to capture the whole population of a settlement, bring them to his cave, and use the days to either force them to sign an extremely tight slavery contract or kill them and add them to his inferior army. He started with the smaller settlements and worked his way up to the bigger ones since his army of inferi was constantly growing. The ones with a palisade around them were a bit harder to crack, but he became very creative in his inferious usage. Throwing them over the walls was fun. In the end, usually about a third of the population was too proud to sign a contract and directly became an inferior. But he also ensured to read the minds of the enslaved with legitimacy, killed the greatest scum amongst them, and added them to his inferior army. Which had another advantage. The contracts created with his skill were extremely powerful and absolute. Not only do they enforce a collection of strict clauses, like don't share information about him without permission with anyone, follow his every command and law, and so on. The true masterstroke he added was the death clause, which said he would inherit anything they owned. Which includes their knowledge. Every time one of them died, he would, for example, get their different weapon masteries, knowledge, language skills, and so on in the form of consumable essences. One disappointment the whole thing had was that he didn't receive their remaining lifespan and body strength. Apparently killing them directly set it to 0. Which makes sense. How strong can a dead person be, or how long can their life be? Was reading their minds an excuse to kill some contracted ones? Of course, they were absolutely bound to his rules through the contract and couldn't disobey him. But getting some essences filled with knowledge was nice. He could use them as goods in the future. This had been an extremely busy month last month. During the night, he spent his time conquering, and during the day, he handled groups of people at once, forcing them into slavery or eternal servitude. In the end, Skagos and Skane were his. Now he had to make sure he could keep it. Chapter 7. Point Me, Copper Deposit. Harry cast his wand to confirm the location of the deposit one last time. Yesterday he took a break, spending the day to finally recover from 1 month of pure conquest and grind. Today he chose to locate all the natural resources of Skagos and Skane. That seems to be the last one. He muttered as he used the spell to search for the different resources on the islands that came into his mind as he sat on his broom, hovering in the air. Land the size of Ireland had quite a few resource deposits to discover. Overall, on his map, there were 9 notable deposits of copper, 7 iron deposits, 11 coal deposits, 2 silver deposits, 3 different locations that contained gemstones, and a few other locations with notable resources. One metal he was missing was gold, but he was already happy with whatever he had found. It would help to start the economy of his land. After all, he had a massive and tireless workforce available. His army of inferi wasn't just a good and fearsome army, they could be used as a good menial workforce. While it was impossible for them to perform more complex tasks like smithing or any other craft, they could easily transport, mine, farm, or chop wood. The best thing was that they were able to work day and night and never need to rest. When he said eternal servitude, he meant it. But even with such an efficient workforce, he had a few big problems. First of all, he lacked skilled workers. The Skagos he had enslaved didn't have many people with any useful skills beyond fighting and hunting. At most, there are a handful of blacksmiths that could be of actual use, though their actual skill level is quite limited. His second problem was a lack of trade. Skagos was a part of the north, but so isolated that the people had barely any contact with anyone outside of it. While it had helped him conquer the islands without any troubles, it limited their potential for growth. It wasn't like he could declare himself king of Skagos and Skane and expect that the other nations would accept it and start trade relations with him. While isolated, it was still part of the Seven Kingdoms, specifically the north. The Seven Kingdoms, while still medieval, were more advanced. His inferi were strong but not impossible to beat. These necromances called the others, up there far in the northern part of the world, called the Land of Always Winter, were proof of it. According to legends, they had been a massive threat with an army of undead far larger than his own, almost having conquered the world. But in the end, they still lost and have been pushed back. Since then, there have been a few inventions that were very effective against undead, for example, wildfire. There is also the possibility of dragons suddenly appearing somewhere and destroying his army. And with his position so unstable and without any idea of how big the world actually is, he had no interest in starting a war against the Seven Kingdoms. There were also the Starks. While he was a different Harry Potter, some of the boys' old emotions lingered. And if possible, he didn't want to become their enemy, but rather an ally. Which brought up the question of how he should act. He could declare himself the king of Skagos and Skane, which would mean war. Or he could lay low and declare himself the new lord of the islands and become a northern lord. For now, at least. Decisions. Eddard Stark POV. Lord Eddard Stark was having breakfast with his family in the Great Hall of Winterfell when Maester Luwin entered through the door, clearly in a rush, holding a letter in his hand. Lord Stark, a letter from Skagos. Something major has happened. Eddard stretched his hand out, taking the letter from the Maester. During the last century, communication with Skagos had been scarce. At most, the Night's Watch or some brave traders had contact with them. While technically part of the North, the Skagos had isolated themselves completely from the rest of the world. Strangely, the letter was still sealed, so how does Maester Luwin know something major happened? A curious look at the elderly Grey Maester made the man reply, "Look at the seal, Lord Stark." The still intact and untampered wax seal showed a rooster. It took a moment for Eddard to realize what was so strange about it. A raven was not a sigil, which either of the Skagos noble houses possessed. House Crowl had a ply flame and black, while House Stain used a driftwood tree, and the strongest of the three houses, Magnar, used a green lobster on white holding a black harpoon. A raven wasn't a coat of arms any house in the north used. So who was sending him a message with its origin noted as Skagos? The hand that has written the word Skagos on the backside of the letter right under the seal looked practiced but at the same time a bit out of place, as if the letter itself were unfamiliar to it. The Lord of Winterfell contemplated the meaning of this for a moment as he noticed that his whole family had stopped their breakfast and was watching him. He told everyone to go back to enjoy their breakfast. He looked at his wife, Catelyn, and upon her nod, he unfurled the letter and started reading it. While it was written short and direct, in the very same clean but still inexperienced hand, its content was explosive. Indeed, something major has happened. And he was unsure how he should react to it. Harry Potter. This wasn't a northern name. What is it, my love? Catelyn asked, and he passed on the letter to her. There has been a war in the north. An uprising on Skagos. He said it with a frown as the rest of the family, including Maester Luwin, looked at him. An uprising, father? Will there be a war? Robb was his oldest, and heir asked with interest in his eyes. Both Jon Snow and the ward of House Stark, Theon Greyjoy, had a similar look. Green boys. Eddard thought with sadness, remembering his own youth, maybe, but it doesn't look like it. Apparently, the three houses of Skagos have been in conflict since their rebellion 100 years ago. The constant warring boiled over, and the small folk rose up and destroyed the three houses. They have elected a new lord, Harry Potter of House Potter. Just an upstart. Why do these small folk think they could create a new noble house? Theon Greyjoy scoffed in disdain. Eddard just looked in disappointment at him and said, Skagos has been isolated from the rest of the north for such a long time that we don't have any real influence on them. Their lands are harsh and wild, and while we can destroy their armies, we are unable to conquer their people. Only one of their own could rule them. Anyway, the lord they have chosen is on its way to Winterfell with a small entourage to swear fealty. What do you plan to do, lord, husband? Kat asked with curiosity in her eyes. Nothing for now. I would rather like to meet this Harry Potter myself before I come to conclusions. Eddard said patiently, we don't really have the power to enforce anything on Skagos, even with the help of the crown. It's not easy to lead an army that far north over an ocean. But this may be a real opportunity to reunite Skagos with the rest of the north for the first time in centuries. The cat gave a nod while his children went back to breakfast. Where Sansa was disinterested in Skagos, Arya was excited. The three eldest boys looked a bit disappointed but indifferent in their youthful courage. Bran looked similar to Arya, while Rickon, still a baby, did not really know what was happening yet. Harry Potter POV. Observe. 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 Oh, a stone, and observe again. Harry thought as he cast the skill again and again from the back of his horse in utter boredom. Medieval travel took so damn long. Unfortunately, he couldn't just use his firebolt to fly to Winterfell and be done with it. While the Skagosi were all under his absolute control under contracts, which pretty much equaled slavery, though he doesn't want to abuse them in that way and only force them to change their savage ways, that couldn't be said by the other people in this world. From the information he had gathered, magic was something gone from this world. In the perception of the Seven Kingdoms, it died with the death of the last Targaryen dragon. Harry had no interest in letting some wild rumors about himself and his magic spread that could spin out of control and label him as a dark and evil sorcerer, which was technically the truth. But only if one sees the world in extremes. A quick journey on his broom was out of the question, especially since, for appearance sake, as a lord, he needed an escort. That's why he was accompanied by a party of 20 Skagosi, young adults that he had put into armor and was teaching to act like actual disciplined soldiers under him instead of the savages they had grown up to be. Of course, 20 men didn't fit on his broom, not that he wanted to cuddle with a hairy, tall guy on his broom. The alternative was obviously apparition or portkayat. Unfortunately, a portkayat only works if he knows his target location, and it would be hard to transport their horses with it. Without them, it would look suspicious. Apparition, on the other hand, while a bit troublesome, should be possible with a horse. And such a small party could be transported with a reasonable amount of jumping. The only problem was that he hadn't learned to appreciate yet. It was one of the very few magics he knew how to do, but didn't dare to learn. Splinching, the result of an unsuccessful attempt if one's mind is not focused enough, was something he didn't want to try. He didn't know how his gamer ability would react to losing a limb. It could result in his instant death if he was unlucky. Or he could directly lose his head. Learning it in the natural way was accompanied by instructors who could instantly interfere and restore your body magically. Meanwhile, Harry was completely alone, one fatal mistake, and he was dead. Even if he was lucky enough to get the skill, he didn't know if the risk of splinting was removed. If he had to level it first, then it was simply too dangerous. After all, he only had to count the one dark magic book in his school books for the first 5 years of his Hogwarts education. It is barely enough to get to the level of an owl wizard without the additional resources of the Hogwarts library. Despite the fact that he knew other spells and magic from the Harry Potter book series and movies, and his skills made it easier to master them, he was still limited. There were many advanced spells he knew existed, but he had no idea how to cast them. Neither did he know how to create his own wizard spells, since he was lacking the necessary classes in arithmancy and runes. And besides that one spell Snape used in the 6th movie, he had no clue about healing magic. So apparition was out because he couldn't learn it. His only choice remaining was to travel by horseback, good that he had more than enough essences to gain a good skill level in it without embarrassing himself. During the journey, he quenched his boredom by leveling his observation skills and occlumency. Oh, and also contemplate whether he should invest his stat points. Name, Harry J. Potter. Class, the gamer. Gender, male. Level, 68. Next level, 68.5%. Title, The Boy Who Lived. Age, 16. Species, human, magical. HP, 380. MP, 165. 193. Strength, 45. Vitality, 37. Intelligence, 31. Wisdom, 23. Dexterity, 48. Charisma, 11. Luck, 7 points, 338. While conquering Skagos, he could stay back and was never truly in danger. During his grinds, he could always take out his opponents from the shadows with his invisible cloak and had enough distance between himself and them. But now things are different. He would stand in the front as a lord of Skagos. People would expect him to be there and not play it safe in the shadows. Harry needed to be strong enough to ensure his own survival and came to a decision. First, Harry chose to raise his intelligence, which was the stat responsible for the amount of mana he possessed, the very source of his power, and even the strength of his spells. When he received a skill at 50 intelligence and one at 100, he kept on adding after seeing their effects. Unfortunately, he got neither one at 150 nor 200, only another one at 250. So he chose to stop there and focus on other statistics to get more skills, raising his overall strength. He brought his wisdom stat responsible for MP recovery, magic control, and logical thinking to 100, gaining 2 more skills, and his charisma to 50 for another 1. The remaining 3 stat points he put into his luck stat since it was his lowest one and he hadn't figured out a way to raise it. Maybe if he was lucky enough, he wouldn't splurge. New skill acquired for raising your intelligence to 50. Dense mana, passive, LV. Max, the mana inside your body is unnaturally dense, increasing its natural potency and quantity. 10% increased amount of total mana. 20% decreased mana consumption for all mana-related skills. 5% increased power for all mana-related skills. New skill acquired for raising your intelligence to 100. High-level mana reserves, passive, LV. Max, you have naturally large mana reserves of high quality. 50% increased amount of total mana. 20% decreased mana consumption for all mana-related skills. 10% increased power for all mana-related skills. New skill acquired for raising your intelligence to 250. Ultimate mana reserves, passive, LV. Max, your inborn mana reserves are the largest ones a human could naturally be born with. 100% increased amount of total mana. 30% decreased mana consumption for all mana-related skills. 20% increased power for all mana-related skills. New skill acquired for raising your wisdom to 50. Magic affinity, passive, LV. Max, you have a natural affinity for magic, your control and regeneration rate are higher than others. 10% increased mana regeneration rate. 10% decreased mana consumption for all mana-related skills. Learning magic comes naturally to you, you are easier to learn and master new spells with your natural affinity for mana and the ability to sense it. New skill acquired for raising your wisdom to 100. Magic manipulation, passive, LV. Max, your magic bends towards your will, you have higher control of your magic-related skills and mana. 50% increased mana regeneration rate. 20% decreased mana consumption for all mana-related skills. You gain the ability to manipulate and shape your magic with your will and no longer require a foci. New skill acquired for raising your charisma to 50. Pretty face, passive, LV. Max, people like the appearance of your face, and enjoy to look at it. Success chances of persuasions and negotiations were raised by 10%. Increased first impression with the opposite gender. Name, Harry J. Potter. Class, the gamer. Gender, male. Level, 68. Next level, 68.5%. Title, The Boy Who Lived. Age, 16. Species, human, magical. HP, 380 MP, 4158. Strength, 45. Vitality, 37. Intelligence, 250. Wisdom, 100. Dexterity, 48. Charisma, 50. Luck, 10. Points, 0. That feeling, is that magic? He toughed as his perception of the world had changed, different from his previous magic sensitivity that allowed him to notice enchantments. The feeling inside his body had also changed, where it previously had been a small stream of mana that he was using for his spells, now it was in lake ready to break out. But he had not time to experiment more with these changes since in the distance a huge castle complex had appeared. That's huge, bigger than Hogwarts. Chapter 8. Eddard Stark POV. Eddard Stark was standing in the courtyard of his home, along with his lady wife and their 5 children, Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and the newborn Rickon, in Catelyn's arms. Jon was also there in the last row among the people present. While he didn't summon the whole household, like during a royal reception, they decided to give the Skagosi party, led by Harry Potter, the usual reception that Lord Stark would get. He knew that it wasn't necessary for him to wait for his own bannerman or any lower lord in such a manner, he was a Lord Paramount after all, but it left a good impression on the opposite party if he showed them some respect and that he wasn't looking down on them. Skagos had been in all but name's own sovereign territory. And this was the first chance in the last century to mend these broken bridges. Once his guards had made out the Skagosi party of 20 men in the distance, he gathered his household in the yard to await their arrival. Arya squirmed uncomfortably under her mother's grip. His daughter had tried to sneak into Wintertown to take an early look at their guests but had been caught by Catelyn, who didn't let her out of her sight. His daughter was so much like his sister, Lyanna. It was then that he heard the beat of hoofs coming closer to them and looked at the gate as their guests entered their castle. A silence descended upon the courtyard as they made out the party. The Skagosi guards were tall, hairy men. An imposing sight, giving his own guards a nervous feeling. Maybe the legends were true and the people of Skagos had giant blood in them. In contrast to their wild northern appearance, the armor they were wearing was well-made castle-forged steel and strangely free of any dents or scratches, as if they were just newly made. Which was unusual in the north, where they prefer practicality instead of good looks. But the most confusing sight was the man, or rather boy, slightly older than his own sons, riding in front of the party. While he didn't have the body build that was so common amongst the Northmen, and his well-made black clothes resembled more of a Southaenaer, his face told a different story. While it was youthful, without even the beginning of a bear, the boy resembled himself. Starks had always had a unique shape of face, while his own children mostly inherited the usual Tully colors, all of them had the typical characteristics of the Stark bloodline hidden in their faces. And so did the boy. His hair, while wild and untamed, had the same shade of black as his older brother and father had in the past. Eddard recognized the same cheekbones as Lyanna, the nose that the boy shared with himself, his father, and his own sons, and the same chin as Benyon and Jon. The only thing different were these emerald green almost glowing eyes. Who is that boy? He couldn't be a star. Did Brandon father a bastard I don't know of? Eddard questioned as a feeling of melancholy spread through him as he saw the boy jump from his horse, handing the reins over to the tall stably Bowie Hodder, who was happy to take care of the boy's horse. Eddard, a veteran of 2 wars, was experienced enough to quickly rein in his own curiosity and wandering emotions and handle the situation with the necessary dignity. This was still the reception of a foreign lord from a territory that didn't have a good relationship with the north. The pressure the black-haired boy emanated was also alarming. Lord Stark recognized the presence of an experienced fighter and leader. Strangely, he couldn't make out other typical signs of that. No calloused hands from countless hours of practice in the yard, no tint because of sunburn. While the boy gave of the presence of a dangerous leader, he looked like a pampered southern noble, with smooth skin and a handsome face. To Eddard's own annoyance, he spotted a blush on his eldest daughter's face. This Harry Potter didn't wear armor but very well-made black robes, and with that good-looking face, he must fit into the image of a handsome knight Sansa had built for herself. Then his eyes went to the banner that his men were flying. It truly didn't belong to any house in the 7 kingdoms. A black raven with green eyes on white ground. A completely new house would complicate things, and some of his more unruly lords could make trouble by not acknowledging it and trying to take Skagos for themselves. Not that it would be an easy thing to do, but that would mean war. Additionally, if he wanted to acknowledge that new house, he had to get an official royal decree. Appointing and legitimizing a new house, there was no longer a powerhouse star as Lord Paramount had. It was the power of the king. There were many questions that needed to be answered first, running through his mind as the boy approached him. Eddard pushed them into the back of his head. Meanwhile, the boy looked into his eyes and held eye contact for a second before he went down on his knees, an action followed by the rest of the men accompanying him, and Eddard released a breath he didn't know he was holding. Then Lord Potter spoke his oath of allegiance, a short ceremony. And once done, Eddard accepted it before saying, "I welcome you to Winterfell, Lord Potter. I believe before we retreat into the Great Hall for a feast, we should have a meeting. Your men can already head to the Great Hall. There are a few things we have to talk about first." I suppose so. It's best if we have this discussion in privacy. Harry Potter stated mysteriously, please lead the way, Lord Stark. Harry Potter POV. Lord Eddard Stark, the head of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell, and Warden of the North, had led him into the ancient castle. As soon as he had been close enough, Harry was able to feel the ambient magic. While the complexity and mass of enchantments and wards couldn't compare to Hogwarts, the magic in Winterfell felt older and wilder. It was hard to describe, as if it had been a long time since anyone had controlled the magic of the castle and it had kept doing its task without guidance. On the other hand, it was bound to the Stark family, to their blood. But none of them were wizards. They had magical blood, he could even see different forms of magic lingering in them. It was especially strong in the children, but in wizard terms, they were nothing more than squibs. Although not really squibs, it was hard to tell since he didn't possess such a high affinity for magic in the past when he met squibs like Filch. It felt more like whatever made them a wizard was dormant. Observe. Name, Eddard Stark. Gender, male. Occupation, Lord. Level, 68. Age, 32. Race, human, first men/magical. HP, 1.008 MP, 275. STR, 93 VIT, 83. Int, 53 WIS, 47. Dex, 69 Cha, 48. LCK, 56. Description, Eddard Stark, also called Ned, is the head of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell, and Warden of the North. He is a close friend to King Robert I Baratheon, with whom he was raised. Family is of great importance to him. He despises politics. So they have wizard blood. Also the friend of the king. That makes things easier. Harry mused as he followed the man into a solar. It was simple and straightforward, but had some interesting items. Especially eye-catching were the very old-looking tapestries hanging from the walls. The first one depicts Winterfell with men, giants, and the children of the forest in front of it, while the other showed what fits the description of the White Walkers and their army of the dead. Take a seat. Lord Stark said politely, as he sat down behind an old wooden desk standing in the center of the sun. I have to say your letter came quite unexpectedly, Lord Potter. First of all, there is something I have to clarify. While you have given me your bounty in the yard, I can't guarantee that your house will be recognized. This decision lies with King Robert. I am aware of that, Lord Stark. But I believe my chances are not bad in that regard. It's time for Skagos to start anew. Harry said with a smile that he was sure, as long as he could convince Lord Stark that the king would do what his friend recommended. Good, that is also my hope. But for that, I need some of my questions answered. Eddard said seriously, are you related to House Stark? And what exactly happened on Skagos? Harry's smile widened as he knew why Lord Stark was asking him that. It had been a shock for Harry to see just how much they inherited from the Black family. He saw some parts of Narcissa Malfoy, Bellatrix Black, and Sirius in them. That one boy called Jon Snow looked like a young version of Sirius, as he remembers from Snape's memories. You could say that, even though the relationship between us is very distant. And honestly, I conquered Skagos. Chapter 9. Eddard Stark POV. That night, Eddard simply couldn't find any sleep. The events of the day weighed too heavily on his mind. Since the discussion in his solar, it has kept his mind occupied through the feast. But what else was he supposed to do? He had learned how big the world truly was and how small he was in comparison. What was a man supposed to do with the information that there was a portal on Skagos that allowed one to travel to other worlds, if you survived it? But apparently his own ancestor and founder of his house had done that. The father of Brandon, the builder himself. Sirius Stark, no Black. Their family had been called Black in a different world. Their banner was probably originally a black dog that had been changed to a dire wolf over time. Though that was just a guess on Harry's part, because Sirius could turn into a black dog. The fact that magic was real was another shocking revelation. But he had seen it with his own eyes. He had seen the boy produce light on his hand, change his chair into a cat, and do other unbelievable feats. Apparently they even had magic in their blood too, but it was somehow asleep. Which was less shocking than the existence of magic itself. There have always been stories about the feats of past Starks. It was now clear that Brandon the Builder had built Winterfell and the Wall with magic that he had learned from his father. And then there was the boy Harry, he was family. They were distantly related to each other, with a difference of 8,000 years. Such a long time, but even after all that time, they resemble each other. The time between the arrival of their ancestor Sirius and the boy Harry, who had followed his godfather, his only remaining family, through the portal between worlds, was disheartening. What is he supposed to do with all that? Magic? Different worlds? And a boy for whom the Starks were the closest still living family in this world. There was a lot he had to think through. Then there were the events on Skagos. A place that had fallen into complete savagery since their rebellion 100 years ago. Where the strong ruled and even fed on the weak. There were stories of the small folk during a particularly harsh winter who resolved to commit cannibalism because they had no other choice but to survive. But a whole island that followed that practice, not out of need, was a completely different thing. It was impressive that Harry managed to rally the small folk on Skagos behind himself, even with his magic, and overthrow the houses that were enforcing their rule over these people. As far as he could tell, that was the truth. The men Harry had with him were telling a similar story, and the rumors existing about Skagos were also in accordance with it. Everything the lad said he had either proved or there were signs that there was truth to them. Harry also seemed to be a decent lad. "What are you thinking about, my love?" Kat asked from beside him where she was lying on their bed. She had probably noticed how distracted he had been all day. He stayed silent for a moment, considering what he should tell her. In truth, he didn't really want to lie to his wife, but the topic of magic was complicated. She was very devout to the Seven, who didn't look on the old gods very well, less even the topic of magic. "Harry Potter." He said that and left it that way. Harry. He seemed like a good young man. He is only 3 to 4 years older than Rob and has already had to fight in a war. I can't believe someone like him is from a place with rumors like Skagos. She said it with a hint of sympathy. The rumors are true. They are the reasons why he rebelled against his liege lords. He didn't want to watch his people any longer. These houses had the sick belief that by consuming another man, they would gain his powers. He stated it quietly. "That is horrible." Kat said with a pale face, "Did he ever?" "No. He didn't." Ned stated firmly that that was one fact he was certain about, he actually has Stark blood in him. "Did you notice how some features resemble our children? He is descended from a distant bloodline related to House Stark. But not the main line. This wasn't a lie. He has Stark blood? That's why his face resembles yours." She realized, "What are you planning to do, love?" "I think I have to write a letter to Robert. Getting Skagos back into the north is too good to pass on. Especially since he managed to cleanse out the worst of them during his rebellion." Ned said it honestly. It was the best thing he could do in that situation. "Hopefully we will get a reply soon enough. I plan to host him until then." "That's wise. What about his family? Does he have parents?" Kat asked in curiosity. "No, they are dead." Ned shook his head. "They actually died when he was a child. He grew up as an orphan. He had a harsh life, and that forged him into the man he is today." Harry Potter POV. It's been a few days since he and his man arrived in Winterfell. Lord Stark has accepted him as Lord of Skagos and wrote a letter to his close friend King Robert in order to make it official. Based on the size of his territory, this makes him one of the greater lords in the north. Although his land was probably the poorest developed with the lowest population density, killing a third of the population made it not much better. And the north was already one of the poorest kingdoms among these 7 kingdoms. He couldn't confirm it yet with his own eyes, but the library in Winterfell showed a clear picture. Harry spent a lot of time in there. The library was one of the oldest and biggest in the world, containing copies of works from millennia ago. One thing it didn't contain were the books Sirius had left with his descendants that he mentioned in his letter. But if they were still around, Harry would find them. He would often spend time exploring the castle when he wasn't in the library or hanging out with the Stark children. "Ha! Take that!" shouted Rob as he slashed his wooden training sword at him. "You need to do better than that if you want to hit me, Rob," he replied as he blocked the attack with his own sword. Right now, he was in the training yard of Winterfell, where he was sparring and alternating with the other boys while the other children were cheering them on. For only being 12 years old, the age where his past self had to fight a basilisk with nothing more than a sword, these boys were far better than him. The only reason he could beat them was because of the skill essences he had drank. By killing the scum that signed his contract, he received a multitude of skill essences from different masters. Obviously, he had used the highest masteries for himself, like riding mastery, sword mastery, bow mastery, and so on. He wasn't really a fan of melee combat, but it didn't hurt to know it. Especially if he hadn't learned it himself. But these boys were really strong for their age. This must be the difference between someone growing up in a medieval world with different values and someone of the modern day and age. Name, Robb Stark. Gender, male. Occupation, noble. Level, 21. Age, 12. Race, human, first men/magical. HP, 240 MP, 105. STR, 26 VIT, 23. Int, 19 WIS, 14. Dex, 27. Cha, 21. LCK, 16. Reputation, 14, liked. Description: Robb Stark is the eldest son of Eddard Stark and Catelyn Tully and is the heir of House Stark to Winterfell and the North. He is named after King Robert. The boy loves his family dearly and has a close friendship with his bastard brother. Another addition from meeting the Starks was the reputation and affection system. It was an indicator of what a person was thinking of him and whether they were his friend or foe. According to his observe skill, the different stages went like this from worst to best: hostile, hated, disliked, neutral, liked, respected/loved, honored/devoted. Based on the sexual preference of the person, he either had a reputation or an affection entry. The only difference is the names of the last two stages. His charismatic skills had helped to leave a good impression on House Stark. He was even certain that the eldest daughter had a small crush on him. Although he had no interest in little 10-year-old girls, but it didn't hurt, since she would certainly grow up to be a beauty. With his last slash, Harry managed to disarm Robb. "I surrender." The boy said it with a small pout. "Good match," Harry replied. "Indeed, well fought, you two." The deep voice of Eddard Stark came from the balcony before he fixed his gaze on Harry. "Please join me in my solar. A raven from King's Landing just arrived." Chapter 10. I received a reply from Robert. Eddard said as he handed Harry an opened letter bearing the royal seal. As soon as he finished reading the letter, he heard the familiar pop sound, and a notification appeared in front of his eyes. Sirius' last will. Sirius died years ago. But he left his last will with you and has always been tough on you. You are not the original Harry Potter, but maybe there is something left of him in you. Objective: find Sirius' descendants and establish a relationship with them. The choice is yours. Completed. Reward: $1,000 EXP. Alliance with House Stark. Lordship. Quest locked. Congratulations! House Potter is now a recognized noble house in Westeros. As soon as Robert heard that you were related to House Stark, he ensured that the nobility would view you as a cadet house of the Starks and not a raised commoner. He even notified the maesters. Lord Stark said it with a smile. "Thank you very much, Lord Stark. I am indebted to you." Harry nodded. "It's fine, lad. For the sake of my ancestors, that is the very least I can do," Eddard replied. As for other technicalities, Skagos never paid taxes and actually owes a lot. All of them have been waived. In order to support the effort of rebuilding your land, the taxes for the next 5 years will be waived too. That will help a lot. Harry nodded politely, as he didn't really care about the taxes. The amount of taxes Skagos would have to pay right now was low since they were already poor. Additionally, I am already preparing letters for the other northern houses to notify them. This will open them up to a trade relationship, especially if they hear of your relationship with House Stark. Eddard continued, "You have to follow the same obligations as any other lord. Uphold the royal laws, respond to summons from your liege lords during wartime, and pay your taxes in due time. Oh, and I have contacted the Citadel to send a maester towards you. You had to use the Ravens of Eastwatch to contact us. That just won't do. You will need your own." They already replied, they will send one to Winterfell. I will escort him to Skagos as soon as he is here. A maester. That will complicate things depending on how much interest they put in him. Harry mused. The maester order was actually one of the most influential powers in the world. Every notable lord had a maester whispering into their ears. The nobles rely on them for knowledge, healing, and counseling, which gives them a lot of power. He had actually used legilimency on Maester Luwin to learn more about the order. It turns out the man was actually loyal to House Stark. At the same time, he was one of the less likable members of the order because he didn't share their views. The reason he was a maester in the north was because the order deemed the place too unimportant. But it somewhat confirmed his worries. At the same time, a place like Skagos was the most desolate place in West Eros. The maester they would send was most likely someone they wanted to get rid of. Which could be an opportunity to recruit a skilled man, depending on the maester, of course. It seems my time at Winterfell has come to an end. If it's fine with you, I would still like to take up your hospitality for today and depart tomorrow in the morning. I was far too far away from my land. Harry said as they finished their discussion. That is no problem. You are always welcome in Winterfell, Harry. Eddard nodded as a small smile graced his face. My children enjoyed your company. And the boys have learned quite a lot from your swordsmanship. Harry had learned just as much as they had. Like the weakness behind using essence to gain a skill. While he had the movements and techniques down, it didn't mean he could use them properly. A skill was like an auto-correction for real-life applications. But it didn't mean that he used it correctly in any situation. This became painfully obvious with skills he hadn't leveled from the beginning. While he knew how to do something, he didn't know when. This was a weakness he had to keep in mind. He was certain it was something the more experienced men had noticed while watching their spars. The pleasure was mine. I will take my leave now, Lord Stark. Harry said as he stood up and left the room while watching the tapestry with the depiction of the White Walkers. The moon was shining high above the old castle, illuminating the ancient stones of Winterfell and bathing them in a beautiful glow. The majority of people were deeply asleep at this time, and the corridors of the castle were almost empty. Only the guards patrolling the walls and guarding the important places were awake, doing their duty. As with Harry, before he left, there was one thing left for him to accomplish in Winterfell. The majority of his stay in Winterfell has been spent inside the library, studying different books to increase his understanding of the world and even grind his mental stats a bit. Although it became hard since he assigned most of his stat points to them. At the same time, his intelligence and wisdom had made him smarter. It was far easier for him to remember what he was studying, but it was even more important to read between the lines and conclude the hidden meaning behind the information. But the most important thing he had been looking for had been nowhere in the parts of the castle he could freely access. And he had it now mapped out almost completely. The only parts missing were the crypt of Winterfell, where he had been allowed to enter once but never to thoroughly explore it, and the private rooms. Which included the solar. He had visited the solar a few times, and every time there was something that had been bothering him. So he chose to take out his father's old cloak and take a closer look at that room. While Lord Stark was aware of his magic, he never learned the true extent of his abilities. Or about his invisibility cloak. He had shown more of the offensive aspect, trying to portray it as a powerful weapon instead of a subtle tool. A bit of deception never hurts, or the man would always distrust him if he knew the true extent of his abilities. Of course, the solar was always guarded by one guard, it contained the records and documents of House Stark. It would be bad if someone tampered with them. But the sleeping charm quickly changed the problem, and Harry could sneak through the door into the room. With the guard asleep, he directly headed towards the part that was bothering him. The tapestry depicts the White Walkers. Something about it tingled against his magical sensitivity. As soon as he had removed it from the wall, he knew what it was. An enchanted door, one that had another anti-muggle charm placed on it. The only problem with that door was that it had no lock or handle. How was he supposed to open it? Alohomora. He cast it while pointing at it. The door resisted the spell. Of course. Harry complained internally while observing the door. He hadn't had that much time, as it was quite late and the morning was close. He had to ensure that everyone was sleeping. Why did Sirius mention these books if I couldn't enter their storage place? He should have known that it was possible that such a large amount of time had passed. The letter was also enchanted to last for thousands of years. Of course. The letter. Mischief managed. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Harry said it with hope in his voice. As soon as he finished the last word, the glowing depiction of two stags and a doe, a dog and a wolf appeared on it before it opened and slid to the side. Behind it was a dark chamber that seemed older than the other parts of the castle. As soon as Harry entered it, the torch on the wall began to light up, revealing the contents of the hidden room. It turned out to be a small library. Although it was small in comparison to Hogwarts or the Winterfell library, overall there were still well over 100 different books. While it was old, it was clean and well organized, with each shelf labeled with the general topic. Pulling one out of the shelf, he saw that it was a tome about advanced transformation. It was even a skill book, giving him a notification for a few different transfiguration spells he had been unfamiliar with. All of these books were written by Sirius handwriting. But these books weren't the only things in that chamber. The most eye-catching objects in that chamber were directly on the opposite end of the entrance. On the floor were a few locked chests, but above them hung two fascinating items. On a bust standing on a shelf was a bronze circlet incised with the runes of the first men, surmounted by 9 black iron spikes in the shape of long swords. According to his observation, it was the crown of winter. The original. Hadn't it been handed over to Aegon Targaryen by the king who knelt, Torrhen Stark? At least that's what the newer history books in the Winterfell library said. Either Starks around 300 years ago were still using the chamber, or the crown that had been handed over was a copy in the first place. Based on the dust gathered in the chamber, it had been decades since anyone had entered it. Besides the crown on a holder was a sword. A sword is made of a material resembling ice. Ice, magical. A sword once wielded by another, one in combat during the long night. It had become the ancestral sword of House Stark until they decided to replace it with a Valyrian steel sword to better fit with the other houses in Westeros. Plus 200% melee attack damage. Freezes anything upon contact, making common steel weapons brittle. Chapter 11. Behind me. Harry ordered as his horse rode out of the gate of Winterfell, followed by the 20 Skagosi men he had brought with him. A lot had happened in Winterfell, and Harry couldn't wait to return to Skagos. He was now officially a noble in Westeros. Eddard Stark had aided him in the hardest step to becoming someone of social status. In any aristocratic society, the jump from commoner to even a small noble was a massive mountain, and even if you managed it, prejudices would follow your house for generations. Harry, on the other hand, while being from a noble house in his own world, had never grown up in such a way. Neither was House Potter recognized in Westeros, and it would be hard to accomplish. But his connection to House Stark allowed him to be recognized as a cadet branch of the Stark family, one of the great houses in Westeros. While it didn't mean much in the south, apparently, where they were the worst kind of nobility, it gave him a ton of recognition in the north. Most importantly, this allowed him to have the time to smoothly cement his hold over Skagos without any interference from any other houses. It was a legal shield until he was powerful enough that nobody could remove him either way. Before his conquest of Skagos and his visit to House Stark, his growth had slowed simply from the lack of any skills to grind. But now he had 142 new books filled with knowledge and spells for him to study. As far as he could tell, it included the whole Hogwarts curriculum up to the Newt level, including runes and arithmancy, and even more advanced magic in certain areas. The most advanced magic was transformation up to mastery level. Considering that Sirius was an animagus, it wasn't a surprise. Followed by charms, specifically combat-related potions, and the dark arts beyond Hogwarts level. The dark arts were probably something Sirius had picked up while growing up in the Black family. Potions was slightly above Hogwarts level because his father, James, and Sirius had to brew the animagus potion. Lastly, there was some basic knowledge in different areas, like warding and healing. It was nowhere close to a professional level or mastery, but enough to learn the basics. That's as far as the wizarding knowledge that Sirius had left behind was concerned. His descendants had added their own notes, understandings, and completely new types of magic. Over the years, they had become adepts in multiple magics, one of which was green seeing, which was a mental magic related to the weirwood trees of the children of the forest. They could dive into that interconnected network of trees and gain access to visions of the past, present, and even the future. The second magic the ancient Starks had learned was the art of skin changing. The ability to use their minds to connect to animals. They could not only make them obey them but even use their senses for themselves. This was where their dire wolf banner came from. The animal that had the highest affinity with the Starks was the dire wolf. It didn't take long, and they were out of the reach of the Winterfell towers and in the wilderness, away from any human settlements. You guys continue towards Skagos. I will go ahead by myself. Take my horse with you, he ordered his men as he unsaddled his horse. Yes, Lord Potter. We will meet you on Skagos. As you requested before, we will avoid any settlements in order not to cause any suspicion about yourself, replied the man Harry had chosen as leader of that guard troop as he took the reins of the horse from Harry. As soon as his men were out of sight, he pulled his invisible cloak out and climbed onto his broom. He wouldn't spend a month traveling by horse again if he could avoid that. By mastering enough transfiguration spells, you understood one of the basic concepts of the transfiguration branch of magic. A new skill has been acquired. Transfiguration, shape manipulation, active, LV1, the ability to freely shape any inanimate material into any form without changing its properties. Maximal size, 1 cubic meter. I didn't expect that, Harry thought as he saw that notification. But it made sense that wizards have such magic. Changing a bird into a brick is a very inefficient way of constructing anything. Harry had been busy since his return from the Starks. Not only had he begun to properly organize his land, but he had also been grinding through the new books Sirius had left for him. It didn't hurt that the old Starks had left 3 chests filled with gold, silver, and gems inside that hidden chamber. He obviously had cleaned it out completely. It wasn't like 3 chests of gold worth around 20,000 gold dragons would hurt the Starks. They didn't even know it existed. Neither do they need the books, with knowledge they can't use, the crown, they are no longer kings, or ice, their previous ancestors' sword, they have the Valyrian steel replacement. He could use the gold to jumpstart his economy. Not like it was much for such a large patch of land. At most, it could buy him 4 or 5 moderate trading ships or something similar. House Stark earns every year more in taxes than that. No, that money would be more useful for him, he would put it back in the future once he could make it easy again. But he had been busy developing his land. Obviously, he wouldn't let his army of almost 16,000 inferi rot away in some cave. Instead, he decided to use them productively by splitting them into 16 groups. 2 groups he assigned to start quarries on different spots on Skagos. Wood buildings were nice and all, but stone was superior. The remaining ones were used to start different mines, 3 copper mines, 4 iron mines, 2 silver mines, 2 coal mines, 1 group for gemstones, and the last 2 were split further for the different smaller metal deposits like tin, lead, and aluminum. This would be the backbone of the Skagos economy. The tireless working force of inferi was useful. His next step was to establish a village at each mining location. He needed people that could process and transport the metals the inferi would bring to the surface. These villages are now focusing on setting up simple homes and food production in the form of farming and hunting. Since pillaging was forbidden and all Skagosi were bound to his contracts, farming could finally become part of Skagos. While he didn't know a lot about farming, he knew enough about crop rotation, fertilizers, and tools to introduce the concepts to the people and make the new economic branch more effective. He also gained some new skills while planning out the different settlements. Architecture mastery, novice, passive, LV1, you have a rudimentary understanding of architecture, construction, and city planning. Engineering mastery, novice, passive, LV1, you have a rudimentary understanding of engineering, machines, and the corresponding sciences. The engineering skill came from him modifying the blueprints for water and windmills he found in the Stark library, used for grain grinding, into blueprints for a water-powered smithing hammer and sawmill. While he wasn't educated in engineering or anything, his education from his previous life was enough to apply these concepts. With enough time, he would even be able to replicate something like a simple steam machine or motor. After all, he understood the principle behind them. Lastly, he laid the foundation for a larger settlement on Skagos. The largest until then were the 3 wooden forts of the 3 noble houses, whose locations had actually been strategically relevant to defending the island from outsiders. Basically, Skagos was surrounded by mountains, the largest one being the one above the Vale, with a big valley in the center of the island containing flatlands, forests, and hills. The island had 4 entry points where ships could land, while the mountains acted as natural walls. 3 of these entry points were relatively small gaps in between these mountains, which proved that the ancient Skagosi nobles hadn't been as stupid as the current ones. Because the noble houses of Skagos decided to place their ancestral seats at exactly these points. The forts at King Shouse, Deep Down, and Driftwood Hall act as choke points for any invading force. The only really viable entry point for any invading force was the large shoreline in the southeastern part of the island. But until the ships arrived there, the Skagosi could already have spotted them and gathered their army to throw them back. And exactly at that southern part, Harry was planning to construct a large port city from which a large trade and fishing industry would originate. The 3 forts would become military strongholds for his army, including small hidden ports for a defensive fleet. Lastly, his personal home and castle would be erected on the top of the tallest mountain on Skagos, right above the Vale of Death. That's why he had been grinding his transfiguration spells. He had never learned how wizards constructed buildings, like Hogwarts, for example. The most logical method in his mind had been transformation as the main guiding force, with enchantments and charms and support. In the end, his guess turned out to be right when he gained a new skill after maxing out enough of the transfiguration spells that Sirius had left behind for him. He could use it now to construct at least a basic home for himself, one from which he could open his dimensional business. It was about time. Chapter 12. Putting a castle on top of a mountain while giving it an amazing site and a very defensive fortress was still a stupid idea from the simple standpoint of constructing and supplying it. Harry had no idea how the people of this world had managed to build something like Casterly Rock or the Eyrie, but there had to be magic involved. Without a certain level of transformation, it would be an impossible task to realize his plans. On level 1, the transfiguration, shape manipulation skill only allowed him to manipulate a space of 1 meter in every direction. Sure, it was a decent size if you wanted to make small pieces of furniture like nightstands, small chairs, and similar, but it wasn't even enough to shape a bed without troubles, not mentioning a large-scale terraforming and construction operation. So Harry had once again to grind the skill. He started by simply flattening out the ground at the different locations he was planning to use for larger construction projects, namely the 3 locations where the wooden forts once stood on Skagos, protecting the entry points to the island, and the location where, in the future, Port City would stand. Each level of the skill only extended the range by 5 centimeters. You had to imagine it that way. Each time he cast the spell, Harry had to have a clear image of what he wanted to accomplish, and he could change the shape of any material in that area of the skill. If he wanted to flatten the ground, for example, he had to do the same every meter on level 1. It wasn't like a brush tool you had in video games to shape it continuously. Harry was glad that he had chosen to raise his stat points, or this whole task would have been even more tedious if he had to take a break every 10 minutes. But he also learned something new about his skills, while skills related to a specific spell maxed out at level 100. A skill that applies a combination of many spells could go higher than 100. How high, exactly, was something Harry didn't know yet. The good thing about his plan to build a castle out of a mountain top was that the whole mountain could become part of his castle. In combination with the extension charm that allows him to expand the internal dimension of a space, he would have enough space for whatever idea he would have in the future. Harry also figured out another feature of his gamer system's map. He could put exact blueprints in it, for example, a tunnel system in the mountain, and get a real-life overlay of it that he could use for his constructions. After he had flattened the peak of the mountain as the foundation for the future castle, storing a lot of stone inside his inventory, he began to carve out a tunnel system into the mountain. This was where he was planning to put his interdimensional trader, a good defendable position. Suddenly resounded the tone of a warhorn as he was in the middle of his work. An attack? From the north? Who is so idiotic to raid my land? He wondered as he flew out of the tunnel system on his broom into the open air, directly north. We should have left once we saw the fort at Deep Down Missing. It's unnatural how flat that ground is. I told you so, said the red-haired girl as a group of 30 men and women ran towards the trees to fortify their position. As soon as they heard the warhorn, they began to run. Unfortunately for them, the shore where the boats were waiting was too far away, so they had to find a post where they could defend themselves. Stop being a craven and get ready for battle. These skags will soon be here. They are worse than the Ice River clans with their hunger for flesh, shouted the man wearing an armor of boiled leather, with loosely tied bones that were clattering while he was running. On his head, he wore a skull, an unnaturally big skull. The skull didn't belong to a man but to a giant. Who would have known that these skags had outlooks ready? They have become better. It was never hard to sneak onto the island. Another man complained as he readied his stone axe. The raiding party was ready for whichever foe would come upon them. It hadn't been their first raid on Skagos. The island was between the true north and the south and had always been a good target for wildlings raids. Their equipment and weapons had been just slightly better than their own. While it wasn't too hard to fight them, the skags were a good source of better weapons for the wildlings, who didn't know how to forge steel. Setting up a smithy in the true north is simply impossible, given how frequently the different clans and warbands have to be on the move. The only ones who could afford it were the Thens. And even though they only knew how to use bronze, castle-forged steel wasn't something they managed to replicate. Where are they? Shouldn't they be here already? Asked one of the wildlings from behind a tree he had taken cover, his hunting bow ready and nocked to shoot the enemy. Are they gathering more men? Maybe we should run. Don't be an idiot. We would never be able to outrun them. They are riding these unicorns, and in that mountainous area, these beasts are really fast. Can you spot them? Rattleshirt, the leader of their warband wearing the bone armor, replied before turning to one of them. He had led a few raids on Skagos and was familiar with the enemy. "You are the idiot," muttered the wildling with the bow, a bit hurt. "There is nobody." 4 leagues, a man whose eyes were white said. "It's too silent. Something is wrong." The red-haired girl, who could be described as kissed by fire. "Don't be scared, Ygritte, maybe I should steal you and fuck some bravery into you. The free folk have no need of cravens." Rattleshirt said mockingly as he eyed the 15-year-old girl lecherously. "Try that, and I will stick your bony shirt up your ass. Do you hear that?" she asked as she heard something strange. "That would be my inferi, using the tunnel I created below you," another voice said. "Infer what?" one of them asked before they realized that they didn't recognize the voice that had just been spoken. But it was too late. In that very moment, the ground around them moved as hands climbed out of the dirt. There are too many hands to count. Whatever this was, they were outnumbered. "What is this?" one of the men cried as he tried to run but got grabbed by some of the hands and pressed onto the ground, unable to free himself. "These are fights. The others have returned. We need to warn the free folk before it's too late." The small man, Rattleshirt, realized what they were facing. He slashed at one of these unholy creatures that had rushed at him. "Not bad. But wrong. These are inferi. My personal army is a very effective one. This is the fate of criminals in my land, depending on the severity of their crimes." The male voice this time from behind Ygritte said again, "Oh, and normal weapons are very ineffective against them." The red-haired girl, scared out of her skin, when she heard that voice from behind herself turned around and used her knife to slash at whoever had sneaked upon her. Only for her hand to be caught midair. "Hey, you are a wild one. But you are outnumbered and outpowered. Give up." The dark-haired boy, not much older than Ygritte, said as he looked at her with these beautiful, piercing green eyes. But Ygritte wouldn't let herself get captured. But the boy was strong, too strong for her to struggle free. "Let me go." "Sorry, your friends are already captured. Drop that knife, and I promise to judge you fairly." The boy said, "I am Harry Potter, by the way. The Lord of Skagos." He forcefully turned her around while she kept struggling against him. "See, feisty one. There is now a place for you to run. So stop struggling, and I promise you, I won't kill you unjustly. I won't kneel to you, kneeler," she said as she saw the others of her warband held down by what looked like living corpses. "You Sauron's cunt with all your bowing and kneeling are pathetic. That's your right, obviously. Still, you invaded my land, and I will have to bear the consequences of your action. In the north, you may have your own laws, but here you will be judged by mine," Harry said with a grin, not at all intimidated by her attempts to free herself. "You know what? How about you take a nap for a while, angry cherry?" "Stupefy," he said, and a red light hit her, and everything around her turned dark. Chapter 13. Wildlings, hey. No, the free folk. Interesting folk with their unwillingness to live in a society, rather preferring wild and free. Their whole morality is fascinating. I can even understand them, Harry mused as he put his captives into the cells in the closest settlement after he had finished going through their minds. The free folk were hard people, living in harsh lands that forged them into natural survivors. Many of their rules and beliefs were centered around their own survival, with very few limits if the winter became too deadly. Even amongst them, there were cannibalistic tribes, but unlike the Skagosi, only a small percentage of the tribes have been mostly scorned by the others. But their presence put him in a moral dilemma himself. He had no problem killing off the Skagosi if they didn't comply with his demand of signing a contract that forces them to live by his rules and prevents them from passing their cannibalistic ways onto their children. On the other hand, these free folk he had captured had only done what they needed to survive and never turned to the truly vile ways. At most, he could blame them for raiding other countries, including his own, and kidnapping innocents. For some of them, it was even their first raid. Only one of them had kidnapped someone innocent, making him the easiest case. The others could only be judged for raiding. According to the laws of the Seven Kingdoms, he should put them to death, but these were pretty much standard medieval laws of execution or mutilation as punishment for a crime. Sending them to the wall wasn't an option, even if they wouldn't just escape from there at the first chance. They had seen too much. While he could obliviate them, an obliviation could do permanent damage. And he didn't want them to just leave, they had still tried to raid his land. The question was, what was a proper punishment? And would such freedom-loving people even sign a contract to uphold their punishment? He had no interest in keeping them somewhere useless in chains or just killing them and turning them into inferi. While he had a pragmatic view of the world and didn't hesitate to get his hands dirty or do something that others would view as evil, Harry had to solve all his troubles with extreme solutions like killing and enslaving at the same time. Cannibals or other despicable humans were one thing, but freedom-loving people were completely another thing. Troublesome, he thought as he left them for now in the cells, while leaving orders for them to be taken care of. It looks nice. At least for the things I had available, Harry muttered as he watched his finished work. It looked like a relatively modern storeroom, with furniture made of the expensive northern ironwood, from which a few trees grew on his land. In the center was a polished store counter, with a few chairs standing in front of it. On each side were some shelves that he had filled with different goods that he had available. A few skill essences he had gathered were sword mastery, spell mastery, shield mastery, and so on. Although they weren't too high of a level. He had very few expert-level mastery essences at all, mostly novice and apprentice level ones. The Skagosi weren't really skilled fighters and relied more on the natural strength of their bodies and size. The only ones with master-level mastery skills had been the few lords on Skagos, and they didn't sign a contract. They had chosen eternal servitude as inferi instead and became nothing more than animated puppets without the skills of their previous lives and only a degrading level of their body's strength. Inferi were pretty much cannon fodder that was hard to kill, they couldn't even level up. He had tried to level them in his instant dungeons, but it didn't work. Their level is determined by their strength during their lives, just lower. Other things he had put on the shelves were different goods that he had available. In the corners of the store, there were barrels filled with different weapons, such as swords, spears, axes, bows, and similar. All of them are basic quality works made from steel. The highest quality weapons he had were bows crafted from ironwood. The sword ice, on the other hand, was currently his best weapon besides his wand, which made his spells stronger, so he chose to keep it in his inventory. Besides that, on the shelves were armor pieces made of leather or steel. Some pieces of clothing were made of wool or pelts. At his store counter, he had a list of foods that he was keeping fresh and ready in his inventory. And lastly, there were some things everyone could need, like primitive fire starter kits, throwing knives, pots and pans, bowls, and other random goods that his people were able to produce. It was trash in comparison to what was out there in the multiverse, but the best he was able to do. He lived in a medieval world, and his transformation was limited to simple shaping if it had to be permanent, often worse than truly crafted objects. What good was a temporary transformation if his customers would know he had ripped them off with them and probably never trust him again? The only way to enter other worlds was if the customer opened the door. Anyway, finishing the interior and stock of the store had kept him busy and distracted from other problems. Like what he should do with the group of wildlings he had captured. They had been imprisoned there since yesterday, and he hadn't approached them since he simply wasn't certain to get the best outcome without having to do something he didn't like to do. Also, it had distracted him from coming up with a castle design. While he had flattened the peak of Skagos' largest mountain, he hadn't come up with a plan for a castle with which he was happy yet. There were simply too many factors to consider and too many inspirations he had. And even with higher level transformation, it was a ton of work. According to his copy of Hogwarts, A History, the construction of the school had taken years. Not only because it was a large castle, but also because of the complexity behind it. There had to be many spells worked into the construction from the start to make it such a magical place in the first place. From different enchantments, for repair, defense, or simply strengthening the materials, to the ward scheme itself, all of them had to be incorporated from the start. The towers and buildings of Hogwarts were actually part of a magic circle that was part of the ward scheme and placed in a specific manner. These were things he had to consider when building his dream castle. He didn't just want a big fucking castle, he wanted a castle that empowered him, a magical place that he was proud of. And that was currently outside of his skill level. His knowledge of wards and enchantments, even with the addition of Sirius's books, was simply too much to swallow. Sirius only knew the basics himself, which consisted of everyday anti-muggle and different small-scale defensive wards. The wards of Winterfell had developed through the aging of the castle and weren't completely wizard in origin. It felt more like natural magic that had formed from intent. That's how he avoided setting even the first stone for his castle beyond preparing the construction location and began working himself into the mountain. That was always part of the plan to extend the castle into it. He had set up a small home for himself that had all he needed to live comfortably, at least as far as was possible, and where it was unlikely for him to be attacked. While this place was not hidden through magic, like the cave system where the Veil of Death was, it was only reachable through the air since he had started working from the top. Harry was planning to connect his future palace to the ground, but there was no need for it now since he was alone right now and his inventory could transport everything he needed. In reality, he was mostly isolating himself from his people. They had their instructions and blueprints for things they could do now. They no longer could practice cannibalism, their human sacrifices, or anything similar. It was not possible even if they wanted, thanks to the contract. All that remained was to declare his prepared room his store. As soon as he activated the skill Interdimensional Trader, a holographic projection of a door appeared in his field of vision. Through his teeth, he could move it around. Harry moved it to the wall opposite his counter and confirmed the plaque. With a bright glow of rainbow colors, the door materialized on the wall. Interdimensional Trader, active/passive, has leveled up to level 2. Chapter 14. Du Weldenvarden. 3 white horses with riders cantered through the ancient woods of Du Weldenvarden, their heads held high and proud, their coats rippling in the moonlight like liquid silver. On the first horse was an elf with pointed ears and elegantly slanted eyebrows. His build was slim but strong, like a rapier. A powerful bow was slung on his back. A sword pressed against his side opposite a quiver of arrows fletched with swan feathers. The last rider had the same fair face and angled features as the others. He carried a long spear in his right hand and a white dagger around his belt. A helm of extraordinary craftsmanship, wrought with ember and gold, rested on his head. In between these two rode a raven-haired elven lady, who surveyed her surroundings with poise. Framed by long black locks, her deep eyes shone with a driving force. Her clothes were unadorned, yet her beauty was undiminished. At her side was a sword, and on her back was a long bow with a quiver. She carried in her lap a pouch that she frequently looked at, as if to reassure herself that it was still there. The elven lady was clearly the one in command. Just as her guards were changing places, a sudden change in the wind's direction carried a steed towards them. Elven had extremely sharp senses and didn't need the warning of their horses to recognize them. Urgles. An ambush. While her 2 guards prepared themselves for the impending battle, the horse of the elven lady rushed far ahead of them, prioritizing her duty of protecting the pouch she was carrying. Only its safety mattered, or all was lost. No longer hiding, the horde of Urgles released a hail of black arrows at the elves, effectively killing the 2 guards with the sudden ambush. A crimson-haired man with maroon eyes, a shade, was leading them and shouted, "After her! She is the one I want!" The Urgles rushed after the elven lady over the bloodied remains of the fallen elves while the shade shot a red bolt at her Garjazla. It hit her white steed as it toppled with a high-pitched squeal, ploughing into the ground chest first. But the elf leapt off it with inhuman speed, spotting her dead guards. She carried on while releasing a pained cry for her companions and rushed into the forest, away from the Urgles chasing her. It didn't matter, the shade wouldn't let her escape. He climbed on a piece of granite that jutted above them and raised his hand as he uttered, "Istil Riboetk." A quarter-mile section of the forest exploded into flames. He burned one section after the other until there was a ring of fire, a half-mile across, around the ambush site. The band of fire thickened as the shade watched his work carefully. It marked out the search area for his Urgles. Suddenly there were screams, and 3 Urgles fell as he spotted glimpses of the elf running from the remaining Urgles. She headed directly in his direction as he leapt from the granite landing in front of her. She turned around, speeding back to the trail, the black blood of the Urgles dripping from her blade and staining the pouch in her hand. The Urgles cut off her escape route. The shade enjoyed her helplessness as she found no escape route while he approached her with a raised hand and said, "Get her." A crowd of horned humanoid monsters rushed at her as the elf pulled the pouch open, pulling something out of it before it fell onto the ground. She suddenly held a sapphire stone in her hands that reflected the fire surrounding them. The elf girl held it high above her head, words frantically forming on her lips. Suddenly the shade was no longer enjoying her panic. Desperate, he shouted, "Garjazla!" And a ball of red flames rushed from his hand at the elf. It was too late. In the emerald light, the stone vanished, and just at the red light, it impacted her. The impact sent her into the air, towards the granite, where she hit a door, which got forcefully pushed open, and the elf girl landed inside. This door hadn't been there before, but the enraged shade wouldn't let her escape. Before he could even consider how a door had appeared in this place, he rushed behind her through the door, his remaining Urgles following him. Harry Potter POV. Harry was bored, it had been days since he had opened his interdimensional trader and placed the door. After leveling the skill and giving a notification, nothing else happened. The worst was that he couldn't grind the skill. Interdimensional trader, active/passive, LV2, a skill received through the essence of the interdimensional trader, allowing the user to turn a building in his possession into an interdimensional store, connecting it to the multiverse. Sub-skills. Create store, active creates a dimensional store in an owned building, 1/1. Appraise, active the ability to appraise objects for their value and relevant trading information. Close/open store, active the ability to lock and open the door. This skill gets leveled through sales. More expensive sales grant more experience. Yes, he needed customers to grind the skill. He had tried to open the door that had materialized himself, but it wouldn't budge. It just gave him a warning. Skill level is too low. So he had nothing much to do. He grinned some smaller spells from Sirius books that didn't do much damage and had to wait for his first customer. Harry was uncertain how exactly the skill was working. But he didn't want to risk it, leave his store alone, and miss the first customer. He kept it always open, since a customer could arrive at any time, the earlier the better. His inventory was stocked with enough rations. Here he was sitting behind the counter while practicing the Bubblehead Charm, a useful spell that would allow him to survive in all kinds of environments while being completely harmless, so he could grind it inside. Just when he cancelled the spell for the X-thousandth time, the door opened violently with a large bang. Something flew at high speed at him. Before Harry even recognized what it was, he instinctively cast the first spell coming to his mind, Arresto Momentum. It was a girl. She is an extremely beautiful girl with long raven black hair and tawny skin. She was very tall, higher than himself. But the most outstanding feature he could make out while she slowed through his spell and carefully landed on the floor were her ears. They were pointed. She looked like an elf. She also seemed to be hurt, as she was breathing frantically and had a large wound on her side. Before Harry could use Observe on her to learn what was going on, a man rushed through the door, followed by the ugliest creatures Harry had seen yet. While the man beyond his crimson hair and maroon eyes looked human, the creatures following him had horns and yellow to greyish skin covered in bristle-like hair. Observe. Name, Durza. Gender, male. Occupation, sorcerer. Level, 233. Age, 114. Race, shade, human. HP, 12,320 MP, 27,500. STR, 322 VIT, 231. Int, 511 WIS, 316. Dex, 216. Cha, 129. LCK, 115. Reputation, -30, disliked. Description, a powerful shade in the service of King Galbatorix. Though he is always seeking ways to undermine the king, currently, he is on a mission to capture the elf Arya and the item she is transporting. What do we have here? Durza asked, his eyes falling on Harry after seeing the hurt elf on the floor, a fascinating piece of space magic. How are you doing this? You don't seem to have enough power for such feats, humans. Shit. I'm dead. Harry thought as he realized how powerful Durza was. There was no way for him to beat the shade, but seeing the reputation he had with him, there wasn't much to do to talk with him. He was already disliked, and if he remembers right, then shades were cruel and evil beings. Being in front of him wouldn't hesitate to torture him. Answer me, human. Or, you know what, you can join her. I will learn your secrets. Garjazla. Durza said with an outstretched hand pointed at Harry before Harry could even react to put up a shield. But nothing happened. Non-combat zone. Offensive magic is cancelled. Oh, good. Maybe this works too. You are not welcome here, Shade. Harry said it firmly after reading the notification. I don't know how you are stopping my magic. But I don't believe you are strong enough to overpower me and these beasts. Durza said with visible curiosity in his eyes that as he unsheathed his sword, it gave off an evil presence. Oh, I think I can. Harry said it smugly. His eyes lit up because of the window that had appeared in front of him. Do you wish to ban Durza LV 233 and his party from your store? Yes or no? Goodbye, Shade. Harry said as he selected yes, and Durza and his Urgles vanished in a rainbow light, and the door had closed. Meanwhile, the elf on his floor fell unconscious. For 20 and more advanced chapters check out https://www.pat*grayon.com/senseicaffeine. For actual news check on my socials, https://linktree.ee/senseicaffeine. Please leave your power stones, it helps a lot. Comment. 8. Comment. Vote. Chapter 15. Man, I thought I was a goner. Harry breathed in relief after the shade had disappeared from his shop and didn't come back through the door. My first connection seems to be the world of the inheritance cycle. I read these books when I was a kid or teenager, but it's been so long that I don't remember a lot of them. Still, the most important details are there. Instead, he chose to refocus his attention on the elf on the floor. She looked beautiful and somehow so otherworldly. At the same time, there was a sense of mortality about her. These burn marks and that charred wound at her side were a clear sign of it. I should get her into the guest room. One of the few rooms he had finished was one guest room. He prepared for exactly such a case. Pointing his hand at the elf girl, he cast the levitation charm and began moving her out of the storeroom. Do you grant Arya LV-162 permission to enter your world? Yes or no? It's good to know that they need my permission to enter my own world. I don't believe I could have beaten Durza if he got out. Neither could I beat Arya here. But she is a good person, so I won't have to worry about that. I hope. Harry mused. Name, Arya. Gender, female. Occupation, sword mage. Level, 162. Age, 103. Race, elf, inheritance cycle. HP, 6130 MP, 5350. STR, 198 VIT, 175. Int, 213 WIS, 171. Dex, 199. Cha, 180. LCK, 153. Reputation, 8, neutral. Description: the elf princess is the daughter of Queen Ilanzit and one of the younger members of her immortal race. She has acted as ambassador for the elves with the Varden for over 70 years and has transported a dragon egg for the last 20 years in order to find a new dragon rider amongst her people, or the Varden. Seriously, elves and that shade too must get some serious bony for their HP and MP to be that high. She has less int than me and more MP. Harry thought as he placed her in the bed of the guest room and inspected her wound. A short decision later, he brought out a vial from his inventory and said, "This is the only bottle of essence of Dittany I had in my inventory. But if I am able to get the elves to become my trading partners, it would have been worth it. I only wish my previous self would have stocked up on more potion ingredients. I only have a handful that I could grow." Harry's expertise in healing was severely lacking. Only thanks to Sirius books did he gain some minor spells, but they were more fit for first aid than actual healing expertise. And to level them up, he had to actually treat the wounded, so they were hard to level too. But still, he cast Episky a few times to mend the bruises she received from her impact, this time using his wand so the magic would be more effective. Meanwhile, the charred wound, clearly from a spell, was treated with the essence of Dittany, hoping that its curing properties were powerful enough. That's all he could do, with his limited healing expertise, and I hope that Arya is aware that she escaped the clutches of the shade. Hopefully, she wouldn't put herself in a coma. Arya Drottning, POV. Arya's dreams were wild and chaotic. The wounds caused by the shade's spell were heavy on her. Any wounds caused by shades were troublesome, but even more were the ones caused by their magic. Only her elven physiology allowed her to resist most of the damage after the vile magic had broken through her wards. She wasn't strong enough to heal herself or focus her mind to defend itself. At the same time, she was confused. Why wasn't the shade trying to break into it? If she were his prisoner, he would without a doubt try to break her. It was rare for an elf to land in the hands of Galbatorix's men. They rarely left the guarding forest. "Goodbye, shade." These words by an unfamiliar male voice were the last thing she had heard. But what did they mean? Was she in the hand of the shade or somewhere else? How? The more time passed, the more she managed to collect her thoughts. The previous chaos cleared up, and the mist of confusion vanished. Now she could sense her body once again. It was healed, with traces of magic supporting it. Was the egg saved? Did Brahm receive it? Where was she? Many questions bothered her, and finally Arya chose to venture out of the borders of her mind, rejoining the world of the awakened as she opened her eyes. Above her was a stony roof, and she felt a well-made bed below her. A closer look at her surroundings revealed a small and simple furnished room, and somehow it reminded her of Farthendur, the father of mountains, and its city, Trondheim, carved into it deep within. It was the walls and the roof made of stone. It looked like the room had been carved into it, just like the city that the dwarves prided themselves on. "You are awake," a male voice said as it came through the door, a young man with dark hair and emerald green eyes reminding her of her own. "A human." He casually pointed his hand at the fireplace in the room, and it burst into fire without him having uttered a word. He used magic silently. "That's a dangerous practice for just a fire." "Who are you?" she asked in the ancient language, the tongue of the elves, which allowed no one to tell a lie. "Harry Potter, POV. Ah, I have her attention. A high enough mastery of my casting ability, combined with an affinity for magic and the ability to manipulate it more freely, allowing me to cast a spell wandless and silent, was all that it took." He thought wryly as he saw that his little show had worked. But he didn't understand the words she spoke next. Beyond a few words he remembers from the books, he doesn't speak them. From his encounter with Durza, he learned the human tongue of Alagagia, and from the Urgles, he picked up their language. And still, it seemed as if his merchant's tongue skill wasn't working with the ancient language. Probably because of its unique properties and not being a requirement to speak with Arya. Too bad. I would have loved to cheat my way to a whole magic language, allowing me to describe the spells I want to perform. The ancient language was far more flexible and powerful than the way wizards used magic. It was basically a language allowing one to shape reality freely. Almost. If it weren't for the danger of dying if one couldn't supply enough energy. "Sorry, while I can understand the intention of your words, I am not able to speak the ancient language. At most, I knew a handful of words, but I didn't have the chance to learn them yet." Harry apologized, "But I am Harry Potter, head of House Potter, a wizard and Lord of Skagos. It's nice to meet you, Arya Drottning, daughter of Queen Ilanzet and Princess of Elves." Her look instantly became guarded as he revealed that he knew her full identity. "How can you only speak a handful of words in the ancient language if you call yourself a wizard? Are you insane? Performing magic through your raw will, do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" She said it in her melodious, otherworldly voice. "I am aware of the risk of performing magic based on one's raw will. The children of my people are doing that by nature until they learn to control their gifts." He replied friendly, giving her a slight hint. Accidental magic was basically raw magic manipulation based on desire. "But I have completed most of my schooling and use spells to perform my spells, just not in the ancient language." Arya's eyes widened as she realized the implication behind that. "Where am I?" "You had a bit of strange luck, Princess. Your encounter with the Shade and his Urgles somehow sent you flying through one of my doors. Beyond my duties as a lord and head of a noble house, I am also the owner of the Dimensional Trader. A store connects different worlds together. And you are right now in a different world, in my home inside the tallest mountain of Skagos." Harry stated it honestly. "Did I die?" "No, you are alive. It's not the afterlife. You can still return to your world, though I would wait for a while. You were asleep for less than a day. I wouldn't wonder if Durza is still out there searching for the door." Harry replied, "How are your wounds?" For the first time since she woke up, she remembered that she had been hurt, her eyes wandering to the burnt hole in her clothes. "What is this? And how did you take care of the Shade?" "Durza, is that his name? This is the essence of Dittany, the essence of a plant with healing properties. I hope it's helping, my understanding of healing is limited. And it's the last I have." Harry said, trying to cause a bit of guilt in her. "As for Durza, I already said that I am the owner of a dimensional store. It's a higher form of magic far beyond my level that was granted to me as an innate ability, you could say. It gives me certain control over my store, like that nobody can fight inside of it, so Durza couldn't harm me. Additionally, I can simply ban people from it. Anyone banned will be sent out of it and won't be able to find a door again." "I see. Thank you for your help, Lord Potter. I am indebted to you." "How can I thank you for your help?" she asked as she bowed her head slightly. "Well, you could buy some things at my store. It would help me improve my ability. And your position as princess and ambassador could bring me a lot of new customers. But most importantly, there are also a few things I can help your world with. For the right price, of course." Once again, she was looking wary at him before he realized that the last sentence could be misinterpreted badly. Chapter 16. It took Harry a while to convince her that he didn't mean it in a perverted way. Not that he wouldn't mind if she offered it. Arya was a very beautiful woman, like most elves were. Once she believed him, he let her choose to let her rest. Tomorrow was another day. From the books, he remembers that beauty was something the elves put much value in. They were immortal, at least from an aging perspective, they could still be killed with a sword or spell. But their longevity made them value different things than humans. Their culture and views were quite different from mortal ones. Elves were also strong, naturally stronger than humans, and their long lives allowed them to master many crafts beyond the level of any mortal, from art and poetry to different crafts or even their weapons. Whatever they chose for a hobby, yes, a hobby, immortality was long, they were beyond mortal masters. What great skill essences they would give! Harry mused to himself as he walked back to a distant chamber. He didn't close his store but put an alarm ward, one of the simpler wards, on the door. If someone should enter, he would be notified. There was another matter he wanted to test. The chamber he had entered was a large hall he had carved out of the mountain. It served as his training chamber to experiment with his skills and spells. Harry indeed didn't speak the ancient language, but he still remembers a few words from when he read the books in his past life. The important question was, could he learn the magic and skills from other worlds himself, or did he have to trade for them with a contract? Pointing his hand at one of the walls, he formed the image of a small ball of flames shooting against the wall. The image of the flames using the air for combustion was always present in his mind, and he said, Brisenger. A small ball of fire hit the wall, leaving a black burn mark on it. Skills acquired. Ancient language mastery, novice, LV1, you know a few words of the ancient language. Higher mastery of the language allows you to shape your magic more easily. It also allows you to guess the true name of every being. A true name gives you control over the thing or being. Only truth can be spoken, and your words have power. Choose them wisely. Grammari mastery, novice, LV1, you have a basic understanding of energy manipulation, allowing you to use the entirety of your own energy in a more or less efficient manner to perform magic or skills. Warning, this skill removed the standard monolimiter. Once the user's MP is at 0, he will use his HP instead. Skills leveled up. Elementary mastery, fire, expert, passive, has leveled to 32. Casting mastery, expert, passive, LV 55. Oh, well, that's unexpected. At least I have a bigger pool for my spells now. Only I can die if I use too much at once. Were his thoughts after reading through his new skills? It could become quite dangerous if he was careless. Especially since his HP was so much lower than his MP. At the same time, it gave him new possibilities for his skill build. It was a good excuse to spread his stat points more into the VIT stat since it became his secondary mana pool. Even better was that each stat point in VIT granted him 10 HP by standard, while the standard int ones gave only 5 MP. Although his int skills changed, there were probably similar skills for VIT too. He should try to grind his stats more before it becomes too hard to grind them by just working out. Unfortunately, Harry had no idea how to focus on his VIT. It was the stat that raised the slowest by only working out. Well, he had a good guess that his observations were only confirming, but it's annoying. He was no masochist. The VIT stat usually rose while he was getting hit or in slight pain. For example, during his spars in Winterfell, he got hit a few times, and that raised his VIT stat the fastest. It was also a good sign that both magic systems weren't just independent from one another. His ethereal masteries were powerful skills, allowing him to use more powerful ethereal spells with less effort and manipulate them far easier. But his casting mastery was the most useful one. Not only was it lessening the mana cost on all spells, it also made it easier to cast any form of magic. At first, it just lessened his casting time, allowing him to cast spells faster, but later on, it removed the need for wand movements, incantation, and even the wand itself on some spells. It also overlaps with his magic affinity and magic manipulation skills, which he gained from raising his WIS stat, lowering the requirements for casting even more. And it was only at the expert rank. His observation told him that every mastery skill goes from novice, acquaintance, expert, master, legendary, and lastly, mythical rank. His highest skills were at master yet, and the leveling speed of every rank becomes far slower but several times more powerful. For his casting mastery, he had still master, legendary, and mythical before him. At this point, he already could cast most of his spells silent and wandless, so what else was to come? Anywhere around him without moving his hand? Multiple spells at once? He couldn't wait to reach it. It was a relief that other magic systems were also leveling his mastery. The lack of any spells to level had become a growing problem for him. Without new spells, there was no mastery experience. I hope the food is to your liking. Harry asked the elf, sitting in his rudimentary kitchen with him, if he had filled the table with different vegetable and fruit dishes. At least he had tried to place what he had available. Thank you, Lord Potter. I didn't know you were aware of the customs of elves, since there are no elves in your own world. She said it politely as she loaded some salad onto her table. Oh, maybe not by name. But the children of the forest may be quite similar to your people. At least culture-wise. Although they are small in comparison, if the stories are to be believed, I am not sure if they still exist, they disappeared centuries ago. Harry replied conversationally, and I am aware of many things. My unique abilities grant me some knowledge that I am able to trade. Arya looked at him and said, You often mention trade. What is it exactly that you want from me? I am in your debt and wish to repay it. You also said you have information that would help my world. From your perspective, there are a few things I would want. Your long lives allow your people to master skills beyond the level of any ordinary human, which would make you ideal teachers in many of them. I have heard you are a master of the sword. Teaching me and sparring with me should help me massively. Harry requested, while internally clapping his shoulder. Getting beaten up by a beautiful girl is not masochism. Or is it? I am doing it for the VIT and the grind. That is acceptable. I can spar with you. But I need to leave as soon as possible. There are important matters I have to attend to. She said it with determination. For Harry, it wasn't hard to guess what she was planning to do. You mean to meet up with Braum and ensure the safety of the dragon egg? You knew. Like I said, though I won't reveal the exact details of my abilities, I have ways to know some information. Harry said, like, I know that the egg will be found by its fated rider and hatch soon. It will hatch? That is even more reason for me to leave as soon as possible. The new rider needs to be protected. He is the hope of Alagagia. She said it with worry. He is safe. There was specifically an interference with your spell to send it to him. But he is with Braum. And soon I will be going on a journey to meet the Varden. This journey is important for his growth and to learn what it means to be a rider. Harry explained, which is the truth, but one rider will not be enough to beat Galbatorix. The secret behind his power is not so simple. You know the secret behind Galbatorix's power? Do you know how many people are suffering under him? Are you trying to force me into something for the good of Alagagia? Are you that greedy? Arya asked, her emotions boiling over her wisdom. No, this is not the secret I want to sell to you. You would learn it either way. Your mother knows it, the Morning Sage knows it, since it is the most guarded secret of his order. It doesn't change anything if you learn of it. Harry replied calmly, unbothered by her anger. Skilled magic users are able to combine their power to perform powerful feats of magic. Meanwhile, dragon riders have the advantage of the air and are always two. But fighting Galbatorix is like fighting thousands of mages combined in one dragon rider. It's not something a single dragon rider or even two with an army of mages could just overcome. So you are telling me there is no hope? No, there is always hope. A good plan could do it. But it will inevitably become even harder. That is one of the secrets I want to sell to you. Why do you think Galbatorix has been so absent for 40 years? Why has he never pushed for Elismira with all that power in his hands? Harry replied, I can give you that and more. What do you want? Arya asked with a tired sigh. From you personally, I want to learn the ancient language. And I want to visit Elismira and treat with your people. I want to establish a trade relationship with the elves, the dwarves, the humans, and maybe even the Urgles. Now you ask, is the information really worth that much for you to teach me something not many humans know? Something like the ancient language could do so much damage in the wrong hands. Well, I pledge my help in the fight against Galbatorix. Because I am the person with the highest chance of beating Galbatorix in both our worlds. Chapter 17. Physical damage resistance has leveled up. Physical damage resistance has leveled up. Physical damage resistance has leveled up. Yeah, fuck you too. Up, what are you doing there down on the floor? With that level of swordsmanship, you will never become a serious threat to Galbatorix. Even if your magic is a threat to him, you will need more to beat him, Arya said, pointing her sword at Harry, who was on the floor. Yet. I am ready, Harry said as he raised himself from the ground, once again readying his blunted sword for another round. He had been sparring with Arya for a few days now. Not only was his sword mastery leveling up rapidly, but also his physical damage resistance and his VIT stat because she was beating the shit out of him. She agreed to a deal with Harry after he explained that Galbatorix was looking for the name of names, the true name of the ancient language, which would allow him to control the rules of the very language almost everyone in Alagasia was using for magic. In exchange for his help against Galbatorix, with an agreed-upon time limit of 10 years for beating him, she agreed to train him in sword fighting and teach him the ancient language. For now, besides beating him, Arya was expanding his vocabulary, teaching him daily things and tricks he could use the ancient language for. Like Gulith du Nifer, which allowed them to dull the edges of their swords and not cut each other during their spars. But each hit still hurt like hell. After he received another round of beatings, they finished their training and sheathed their weapons. Arya addressed him, "Are you ready to leave soon? My wounds have healed completely, and it should have been enough time for Durza to have left the door. Others of my people should have discovered the site by now. Not only do I need to inform my mother, but she has probably tried to scramble me multiple times but never found me because of the vast distance. But I also need to warn the Varden of the twins." The Varden were a rebel force fighting against the harsh rule of Galbatorix, who had violently taken over Alagasia after betraying the Order of Dragon Riders and wiping them out. Galbatorix was pretty much a fantasy tyrant, resembling the likes of Sauron, Emperor Palpatine, or good old Voldy. These twins were another piece of information that he gave her in exchange for her teaching. The twins were a pair of brothers, the leaders of the Duvrang Grigata, and the magician organization of the Varden, who were in reality spies for Galbatorix. The funniest thing about them was that they were the ones searching the minds of anyone joining the Varden to see if they were possible spies. "There is one last thing I have to handle before I can leave. After that, we can go," Harry replied with a sigh. "You finally showed yourself, sorcerer. Were you too craven to face us?" Ygritte, the red-headed woman, asked as she saw Harry enter the building where their cells were located. "Not really, Cherry. A lord has many duties to attend to. More important than some raiders in his land," Harry replied, not rising to the provocation of the girl. "At least not much." "Like what?" "Competing with other southern cunts, who can kneel better." Ygritte mocked. "No, but it is not a bad idea if I send you to them. Maybe you can learn a thing or two about not mocking the person who holds your life in his hands," Harry replied with a grin. This girl was fun. "As if I am scared by death." "You Sautrons are real wimps," she replied. "Oh, I would be scared. If death means eternal suffering and servitude, I would be really scared." "You met others who have mouthed off to me already," Harry grinned. "What do you want with us?" Rattleshirt asked for the first time since Harry had entered. You could say anything about the bones he had been wearing or his character, but at least he took his duty as leader seriously. "How many people are in your tribe? Any more skin changers besides that guy?" Harry said, pointing his finger at one of the wildlings, who had used a falcon to scout their surroundings. It was a nice skill to have, but capable magic users in Alagasia could do similar things better with enough training. "If you lie to me, I will know it. And you won't like the feeling of an enchanted grain of sand that is always burning hot, burning in your body until the end of your life. At some point, you would try to cut yourself up just to get it out. But if I remove your arms first, we won't have that small problem." His scaring tactic was working. Torturing someone was not really his style, but if it was worth it, he would do it. And being able to recruit more skin changers was worth it. They were the perfect people to build a spy network with and to become the scouts for his forces. An advantage no lord in Westeros had. Sure, Harry was already strong and would become very powerful, but he had no interest in doing all the dirty work. He was still only one man. Now that he was building Skagos up, he would need more captive people. A group of skin changers as spies and scouts were worth it and had a small advantage over everyone else. Rattleshirt, or rather the Lord of Bones, was quiet for a moment before replying, "My tribe consists of around 1,200 people. Overall, there are 7 more skin changers and 3 children who have shown the potential to become one." 11 is a good start," he nodded, pleased with the reply, before ordering, "You will return to your people and bring them here. I will send more longboats with you. They will become my own people, joining Skagos, having no longer to live up there in the harsh cold. You are letting us go? Do you really believe we would return once you set us free? The Lord of Bones stared at him as if he were an idiot. The other free folk were doing the same. Even if we return, we would never kneel. Ygritte shouted. I don't care whether you kneel to me or not. As long as they follow the laws of my land, they are free men. I enslaved the Skagosi, forcing them to sign a binding vow to follow my rules until their deaths. Skagos has become one of the worst places in this world, a land of cannibals where the strong feed on the weak. This is no longer allowed. I bound them with magic, or they joined my undead legions, Harry explained. Your people won't have to sign such a vow. But they will have to follow the laws of this land, like my people. There will be more than enough that will come willingly, even if they have to kneel. But I don't care about them kneeling. I am certain that you will respect me through my deeds. The wildlings looked at him, baffled. They had never heard of such a lord. And I am certain that you will return. Because your choice is either to accept my terms and sign a magical, binding vow that you will return with your people, or I will force you to do it with a spell. Or if that should fail, I will no longer care about that plan and just kill you, turn you into one of my inferi, and make you my eternal slave, Harry stated coldly, looking directly into Rattleshirt's eyes. We don't have to kneel in front of you, Ygritte asked. No, to be honest, I hate all that groveling. As long as you follow the laws and show me the respect you would give to any leader of your people, I am fine with you. It's just for the benefit of your people, with my magic, this place will become one of the most powerful lands in the world. All of you could live far better lives. Because where wealth is, the people automatically become wealthier too, Harry said. Normally, at least. Until someone turns so greedy that they exploit their people. The downsides of capitalism. At least I will be in control for a long time. I agree to your terms. If your vow does what it says, and you are ready to sign one yourself that you won't mistreat the free folk under me while they follow your rules, I will do as you say, Rattleshirt said seriously, staring right back into Harry's eyes. No problem. Can any one of you read? Harry said simply as multiple contracts appeared, one in front of himself. Surprisingly, Rattleshirt knew how to read. Since we are done with that, there are a few more questions I have for you. Are there giants beyond the wall? What about the children of the forest? Chapter 18. Harry had never seen a forest like Duweldenvarden, not even the memories he had of the Forbidden Forest could compare with the magic of this place. The magic was so abundant here, and wherever he looked, he found new plants that he had never seen before. He wondered if he could use them for potions, but he didn't know enough about the craft to truly experiment with completely new and unknown ingredients. In fact, he didn't have a mastery skill for potions yet. It wasn't something he had tried to grind simply because he lacked the ingredients he was familiar with. Hopefully, the magic he could learn from the elves would help him grow the few seeds he had in his trunk and at least give him some basic ingredients to start with. Potions were powerful, bottled magic, but you needed the necessary knowledge to use them. This ancient forest was a truly peaceful and magical place. It was strange if you thought about the tyranny the rest of the continent had to endure. His journey was educating, and Arya was continuing to teach him the ancient language. It was part of her deal, and he would have to keep his own side as well. Contracts were absolute. Even giving him a quest. Contract: bring Galbatorix down. Objective: ensure the downfall of Galbatorix in the next 10 years. Reward: contractual compensation, ancient language, sword lessons, introductions. 2,500,000 EXP. Failure: death. Just good that Galbatorix would die either way in around 2-3 years. But my existence changed things. So I will have to make sure it happens, Harry thought. The amount of EXP showed that killing him wasn't that simple. At his current level of 70, this was almost 4 levels. And it's just bonus EXP from a quest, not the kill itself. Theoretically, it was a free deal for him if everything went according to plan. But Arya wasn't captured by Durza and wouldn't be with Aragon during his attack. It very well could be that their new dragon rider dies during the Battle of Farthendur, a battle just a few months away. Also, if he stayed back, he wouldn't be able to reap the rewards of his foreknowledge. Sure, the ancient language was nice and all, but there was so much more. He already ensured countermeasures for the safety of Aragon by informing the Varden of the twins, acting as spies for the Empire, and the forthcoming attack. This would allow them to prepare themselves. First, they had to reach Ellesmere. Du Weldenvarden is the most visited place in the world. It already shocked Arya that his store had actually connected to it. Everything arcane shouldn't be able to pass through its borders. Right now, the forest is even more closed off. According to the elves they met in Silthrim, one of the major elven cities, the attack on Arya and her disappearance have hit Queen Eilandsady hard. She completely sealed the forest off, not allowing any communication to leave or enter anymore. To contact Varden, they will need her permission first. They even received an elven escort from Silthrim, led by an elf called Lofen, to their capital of Ellesmere, and with that also some very beautiful steeds. Proud white stallions, called Folkver. It was an impressive sight. According to Lofen, the elves have bred their horses for centuries. No wonder they have such powerful and intelligent ones. They understood the ancient language and would go wherever one told them. From there, it didn't take long until they reached their goal. The deeper they rode into Du Weldenvarden, the thicker and larger the trees grew. It meant that they would soon reach Ellesmere. Suddenly, the strangeness of their surroundings lifted, revealing an elf standing before them, sheathed in a brilliant ray of light that slanted down from the ceiling. He was garbed in flowing robes, with a circlet of silver upon his brow. His face was old, noble, and serene. Arya had already warned him about what was happening, and he spoke in the ancient language. Greetings Gildarine the Wise, Prince of House Miolandra, wielder of the White Flame of Vandile, and guardian of Ellesmere. I am Harry Potter, Lord of Skagos, a distant land, a wizard, and a merchant. I come in peace and in friendship to open relations with the elves. For a moment, the elf watched him before he smiled, closed his eyes, and spread his arms in a gesture of welcome. He held the posture. The way is clear, said Arya. At a soft command, her steed moved forward. They rode around the elf like water parting at the base of a weathered boulder, and when they had all passed, he straightened, clasped his hands, and vanished as the light that illuminated him ceased to exist. Gildarine had been guarding the city since the days of the elves' wars with the dragons. Nobody was allowed to enter the city without his permission. As they rode deeper into the city, Harry was impressed by the sight revealing itself in front of him. Ellesmere was truly a wondrous sight, a city of trees. In fact, the trees were buildings themselves, something that Harry had never seen with his own eyes before. As if they had grown in the shape of buildings, he had been intellectually aware that he would see something like this. He remembered it from the books, but knowing and seeing are two completely different things. Eventually, they were welcomed by the inhabitants of the city. Their almond eyes were fixed on Arya, but some also stared at Harry out of interest. All of the elves possessed the same ethereal beauty as Arya. Seeing her, they bowed in unison and began to laugh in unrestrained happiness. Their voices were so bright. Arya climbed from her horse and said, Gunga. Before turning towards him, I said, release your steeds as well. We have no further need for them, and they deserve to rest in our stables. Harry was still distracted by the wondrous sights, but he followed her example while watching the city in wonder. For the first time, he was actually happy to have died, starting a new life. If it hadn't happened, he would have never been able to see such wonders as this. How do they make buildings like this? He asked Arya. We sing to the forest in the old tongue and give it our strength to grow in the shape that we desire. All our buildings and tools are made in that manner. Can I do that too? He asked, interested. In time, but I believe you have your own ways too. She replied as she led him down a cobblestone path, elves watching them from all sides. I do, but it's not so natural and wondrous like these buildings. I shape it afterwards with my magic and wool, while you let the trees grow to your wishes. The path ended at a net of roots that formed steps, like bare pools of earth. They climbed to a door embedded within a wall of saplings. The door swung open seemingly by itself, revealing a hall of trees. Hundreds of branches melded together to form the honeycombed ceiling. Below, 12 chairs were arrayed along each wall. In them reposed 24 elf lords and ladies. It's a bit funny, he has the combined life experience of 2 lives. He has over 50 years of life, and he is right now the person with the least of it in this room. In front of most of them, he was pretty much a toddler. At the head of the assembly stood a white pavilion that sheltered a throne of knotted roots. Queen Eilandsady sat upon it. She was as beautiful as an autumn sunset, proud and imperious, with 2 dark eyebrows slanted like upraised wings, lips as bright and red as holly berries, and midnight hair bound under a diamond diadem. Her tunic was crimson. Around her hips hung a girdle of braided gold. And clasped at the hollow of her neck was a velvet cloak that fell to the ground in languid folds. Despite her imposing countenance, the queen seemed fragile, as if she concealed great pain. Harry recognized the resemblance to Arya. And he was a bit nervous right now. A lot of his current future plans for his own people depended on leaving a good impression with the queen. On her left hand was a curved rod with a chased crosspiece. A brilliant white raven perched on it, shuffling impatiently from foot to foot. He cocked his head and surveyed Aragon with uncanny intelligence, then gave a long, low croak and shrieked, "Werda!" Was he of the same race as the ravens Westeros used when the maester announced the coming of winter? Probably not. Harry's affinity for magic told him that it was highly penetrated by magic. The door closed behind them, and then Arya knelt on the moss-covered ground and bowed first, followed by their elf escort. The only one remaining standing was Harry. He wouldn't kneel before the leader of a different nation, it was unfit since he was representing his own people as their leader. The only reason he kneeled in front of Eddard Stark was to ensure the safety of his people. Ilanzadi stood and descended from the throne, her cloak trailing behind her. She stopped before Arya, placed trembling hands on her shoulders, and said in a rich vibrato, "Rise." Arya did, and the queen scrutinized her face with increasing intensity until it seemed as if she were trying to decipher an obscure text. At last, Ilanzadi cried out and embraced Arya, saying, "Oh my daughter, I have wronged you." Chapter 19. Harry stood there patiently and watched the spectacle as Arya said formally, "Ilanzadi Drottning." That response clearly bothered the queen as she withdrew as if stung and once again repeated her words, "Oh my daughter, I have wronged you." She covered her face. "Ever since you disappeared, I've barely slept or eaten. I was haunted by your fate, and I feared that I would never see you again. Banning you from my presence was the greatest mistake I have ever made. Can you forgive me?" The present elves were stirred by these words. Arya hesitated for a moment, but at last she said, "For 70 years, I have lived, loved, fought and killed without ever speaking to you, my mother. Our lives are long, but even so, that is no small span." Ilanzadi drew herself upright, lifting her chin. A tremor ran her length. "I cannot undo the past, Arya, no matter how much I might desire to. And I cannot forget what I endured. Nor should you." Ilanzadi clasped her daughter's hands. "Arya, I love you. You are my only family. Go if you must, but unless you wish to renounce me, I would be reconciled with you." For a terrible moment, it seemed as if Arya would not answer, or worse, would reject the offer. Harry could see her hesitate and quickly look at her audience. Then she lowered her eyes and said, "No, mother. I could not leave." Ilanzadi smiled uncertainly and embraced her daughter again. This time, Arya returned the gesture, and smiles broke out among the assembled elves. The white raven hopped on his stand, cackling, and on the door was graven evermore, what now became the family lore, "Let us never do but to adore." "Hush, Blagden," said Ilanzadi to the raven. "Keep your doggerel to yourself." Breaking free, the queen turned towards Harry and asked, "And who is this young human you have brought in front of us, daughter?" "Ilanzadi Drottning. Atra Esterni ono Theldwin." Not letting her gloss over him, Harry greeted her in the traditional greeting of the elves. Ilanzadi's dark eyes widened. "Atra du Ivernya ono Varda. Un atra moran relifa unin hyarda honor," replied Harry, completing the ritual, before introducing himself in the ancient language, "I am Harry Potter, Lord of Skagos, a distant land in a different world. I am here to establish trade between our people." Hearing the words different world in the ancient language shocked the elves, but before anyone could say anything, Arya interrupted, "He is also my savior, having protected me from Durza. Also, he is a wizard, able to use magic different from our own." The last sentence was clearly stated to give her people a hint. In their contract, they agreed that Arya wouldn't reveal that he would help in their fight against Galbatorix. It was a card that he wanted to use a few more times. Ilanzadi nodded and took a more political pose, "Welcome Harry Potter of Skagos. We are indebted to you for saving my daughter. Even in our long lives, it is a first for us to receive a traveler from a different world. We would love to hear more of you. Ancient language mastery, expert, LV45, you are able to converse fluently in the ancient language, having an expansive vocabulary and understanding of the grammar. Higher mastery of the language allows you to shape your magic more easily. It also allows you to guess the true name of every being. A true name gives you control over the thing or being. Only truth can be spoken, and your words have power. Choose them wisely. His time with the elves had brought his understanding of the ancient language to a high level. He and Arya had kept up their training and lessons. Even his swordsmanship had reached a high level. But at the same time, it reached a plateau. Sword Mastery, Master, LV 100, Capt. You have mastered the art of the sword beyond the limits of any human body. The absolute peak of your race. Training with the elves had taught him a lot. Arya not only made sure that he understood the physical part of swordsmanship but also the mental one. For the fun of it, even other elves had joined in the training. He had leveled it so far that he couldn't level it any further. Only his stats and different skills could improve it more, through overlapping skill effects and, of course, experience. And yet it wasn't in the legendary or mythical rank, maybe not all skills could reach it. But the elves have taught him a different method to become a better swordsman. The way of knowing, passive, LV 37, a skill that enables the user to interpret the body language of his opponents and combine it with the user knowledge to gain an advantage. Makes skills 37% more effective against opponents of the same or lesser level. Makes skills 18.5% more effective against opponents up to 20 levels higher. Makes skills 37% more effective against opponents over 20 levels higher. Unfortunately, the goal he mainly visited Elismira for has been denied. Harry had hoped he would be allowed to study magic under the best of their mages for a while. But he wasn't even granted an audience with Ormuz, the only living dragon rider of the elves. He even had to swear that he wouldn't reveal Ormuz's existence to others. In truth, the elves, besides Arya, looked a bit down on him. Sure, he was weaker than them currently. He didn't have hundreds of years to grind his abilities after all. But it was a bit rude. Still, he accomplished most of his other goals, and while they didn't agree to permanent trade relations because there wasn't much his people could offer, they still granted him a few gifts he had hoped to receive. He gained seeds for crops that were magically enhanced and perfected to grow in cold climates. Different magical plants and their seeds are growing in Du Weldenvarden. And a personal thanks from the Queen, in the form of a bough sung from a yew tree by her a few years ago. The best bough he had ever seen. While these gifts weren't much for the elves, for him, they were massive. These seeds could completely change the economy of Skagos, making it one of the greatest food producers in the north. And one thing was common among the northern houses, they disliked the south. So if they had to choose between buying from the south or a northern house, they would rather choose the northern one. Especially one related to the Starks. Make it a bit cheaper than the southern crops, and he would massively gain favor with them while the profit remained similar. Since he was closer to the northern houses, the transport of the goods was cheaper. But it was less than he hoped for. Elves were masters of their craft, and a supply of high-quality goods would have been a massive boon. But he could understand their reasoning. He was a stranger from a different world, suddenly appearing from nowhere. It could be a ploy from Galbatorix or some other evil. They didn't know him enough, and it wasn't worth the risk. Still, his greatest regret was the lack of magic lessons. And he also got why, these were powerful state secrets exclusive to elves and previously dragon riders. There was no other group in Alagasia with such an in-depth understanding of magic, not even Galbatorix had completed his magic training with the dragon riders. That's why he put so much importance into learning the name of names. With it, he could control the ability of anyone relying on the ancient language to control magic. Other human organizations had a limited vocabulary of the ancient language and relied on the creative use of the few words that were available to them. And Harry had already learned how to speak it fluently during the last 2 months with Arya and his few weeks in this elven city. "Are you sure you don't want to come with me and leave by yourself?" Arya asked him in the ancient language. "I could complete the rest of my deal with you." "No, I want to explore Alagasia first by myself. Also, it gives me a reason to seek out your pleasant company again in the future." Harry said it with a flirty smile, but Arya remained unimpressed. She had already seen through his unnecessary jokes and knew he wasn't serious. To be honest, he found Arya attractive, but he was realistic. But love was for elves something very special and important. So he was certain it would be hard to ever seduce her. Hell, Aragon openly proclaimed his love for her, saved the whole continent and her people, and didn't even get a kiss. It would be a while before he would meet her again. She was returning to the Varden with a small contingent of elves in order to meet this new dragon rider. Also to ensure that he wasn't dying before fully trained. Harry, meanwhile, had his own plans. And would be off on his own. There wasn't much more he could gain from the elves at this point, at least he had earned their trust. But there were more opportunities. While Alagagia was small, smaller than the Seven Kingdoms, and Du Weldenvarden was only 4 times as big as his own territory, there were opportunities out there. It was still a different world after all. One under the control of a tyrant. Chapter 20. Clouds encompassed nearly half the horizon, dense white plumes as tall as mountains. Harry didn't want to fly lower, even with his disillusionment charm. He feared that someone could make out a strange shimmer in the sky. He hadn't put enough grind into it yet, since the ancient language and his sword lessons with Arya had distracted him. A similar spell while using the ancient language would be too cost-intensive. While magic spells allowed him more freedom in what he could do, they had the grave disadvantage of being more cost-intensive than wizarding spells, which were more static and straightforward. Especially spells that had a continuous effect, like disillusionment or invisibility. Neither did he want to use his invisible cloak and risk losing it. He knew there were more ways to use and power magic with the ancient language, but he only learned how to speak it, not use magic with it. There were many applications that he still needed to master, from wards to using energy from his surroundings. But casual experimentation was too risky since any wrong spell could end in death. For example, a ward that shields you from physical projectiles, cast in the ancient language, could kill you instantly if you accidentally land in an avalanche and never formulate the spell properly with a good image. It would simply drain you of all energy while you did what you told it to. Instead of a risky experiment, Harry chose to put the bubblehead charm on himself and open his map screen. With that map function, he could tell if he was still flying in the right direction, even without seeing through his eyes. As long as these clouds didn't turn into storm clouds, his trusty firebolt would survive this flight through the clouds. Harry had no other choice. After all, it seemed like they were stretching until his goal, Vrengard. The island of the Dragon Riders, where their city was located, was Doruareba. At least its ruins since their fall through Galbatorix and his Forsworn. It was one of the longest journeys he'd done on a broom ever. The distance between Elismira and Vrengard was about 4 to 5 times the length from one end of Skagos to the other. While on land, he could take some breaks, but the last part was over the ocean. And the clouds didn't really make this journey easier. At least his flight mastery was going up. This flight also gave him time to ponder about a ton of different things. It had taken hours until he had finally broken through the clouds. He had been lucky that no storm had broken out, or the situation would have become far more uncomfortable. By the time the sun had finally appeared above the horizon, Harry didn't have much energy to pay attention to his surroundings. But he still noticed once the shape of something specific appeared on his map. The edge of an island lifting his head, his eyes adjusted to the brightness. Some miles to the north, a ring of mountains rose out of the clouds. The peaks were clad in snow and ice, and together they looked like an ancient, jagged crown resting atop the layers of mist. The fire mountains that surround the heart of Vrengard. Finally, he toughened up as he regained fresh motivation. While his body didn't really get exhausted and could go on for a few days, concentrating on the map while keeping himself on his broom in such a dangerous situation was simply tiring on the mind. Before him, a huge bowl-shaped valley revealed itself, encircled by the steep mountains that had poked through the clouds. Around these mountains, a dense forest of spruce, pine, and fir trees blanketed the sides, as well as some foothills below. Inside the valley, he was able to make out a number of stone structures among the trees, tumbled, overgrown entrances to caves, the husks of burnt-out towers, grand halls with collapsed roofs, and a few smaller buildings that looked as if they might still be habitable. A few dozen rivers flowed out of the mountains and wandered across the greens of the valley until they poured into a large, still lake right in the center. Around the lake were the remains of the riders' city, Doruareba. The buildings were immense, many larger than the keeps in Hogwarts or Winterfell. Some could hold whole villages. Every door was like the mouth of a vast, unexplored cavern. Every window was as tall and wide as a castle gate, and every wall was a sheer cliff. It must have been a splendid sight during the era of the Dragon Riders. Now nothing more than these ruins remained. He wondered if he should explore the city and plunder it for valuables. His guess was that there was no way that Galbatorix hadn't already picked the city clean. There have been too many valuables for it to be left alone. And it wouldn't make a good impression if he began to rob the dead. Warning! Unusually high concentration of radiation detected. Please take the necessary steps to protect yourself or leave the area. And there is that. If he remembers right, one of the Dragon Riders turned his flesh into energy with a spell, causing something similar to a nuclear explosion. How crazy must that war have been, they even turned themselves into magical nukes. A short look at his HP told him that it was slowly grinding down his life. He had about 2 hours remaining, and he didn't even land yet. The bubblehead charm was probably also protecting him from some of the damage by allowing him to breathe fresh air. They didn't even understand the concept of atoms and managed to create a nuke. So fascinating. Harry thought while trying to come up with an efficient spell to shield himself. But he was most excited to learn more advanced methods to use their magic so he could experiment with it himself. He knew a capable mage could draw energy from other life forms and even plants to power his spells. And even cause a nuclear explosion. Was it to power his spells with the power of the sun? Or a controlled nuclear reaction? So much fun with a higher understanding of science. Hopefully, he will get his hands on some modern science books in the future to apply more advanced principles. In his last life, he studied computer science, which had only a limited amount of physics and chemistry in it, more mathematics. Maybe he could apply principles from it to the ancient language and magic. Harry cast a spell in the ancient language, formulating one that covered alpha particles, beta particles, neutrons, electromagnetic rays, and waves in an efficient manner so it wouldn't drain him of his energy too fast. It only took a sixth of his current MP recovery rate to keep up the spell. And as soon as he saw that the radiation was no longer affecting his HP, he landed in the valley. Point me, Rock of Kuthian. Harry cast a spell with his wand. He wasn't familiar with the area, and he knew that a powerful spell had removed the memories of the existence of the rock from anyone who ever knew of it, including its contents. The only reason he knew of it was because he obviously read it in a different life in a different world, and no matter how powerful the magic used in it wasn't powerful enough to cross the boundaries between universes. If it were, Harry wouldn't even think of fighting Galbatorix because he could easily use even more powerful magic. The Rock of Kuthian stood upon the edge of a large clearing, wherein grew a tangled pool of roses, thistles, raspberries, and water hemlock. Behind the stone prominence stood row upon row of drooping fir trees, which extended all the way back to the mountain that loomed high above. He had no interest in exploring the island, he could return here at any time. Besides the mutated animals from the radiation, there wasn't much interest. And he wasn't even sure how much use these animals could be. One thing was sure, he wouldn't eat them, but maybe they could become potion ingredients. Unfortunately, he had no understanding of the art to even experiment with them. It was the same problem he had in Duweldenvarden with all the new plant life that existed there through the high conceptions of magic. Instead, he remained focused on his target, a lot depended on it. Standing in front of the base of the rock, he spoke the words that he had spent quite a lot of time coming up with. Words in the ancient language that described a person were words speaking of multiple lives, the wish to live to the fullest, and seeing as much as he could. But also a desire for power, not having to see the void again, and immortality. It also spoke of his flaws, his lust, his greed, his restlessness, and his desire for perfection. It was his true name. He wasn't perfect, nobody was. He wasn't good, but neither was he evil. He was just him, and he had his own interests to fulfill.
Thanks for listening.